Welcome to my channel. Today I have a video on the hardest SAT math no calculator multiple choice questions. So what this is going to be consisting of is practice tests 1 through 10 released by the College Board for the SAT, as well as the College Board's Maine 2018 SAT and Maine 2019 SAT. So as you progress through the video, you're going to move from more slowed down and in-depth answer explanations with tips, tricks, and strategies to medium-paced answer explanations with tips, tricks, and strategies to faster-paced answer explanations with tips, tricks, and strategies. Keep in mind, I've scored perfectly on the SAT math section on back-to-back SATs and have scored 1590 on the SAT overall. If you're looking for more SAT prep, I also have a 90-day SAT prep series on my channel and a 14-day SAT prep series on my channel, as well as other videos regarding the SAT. So to start with today's videos, you're going to be going through slowed down in-depth answer explanations. That'll be practice tests 1 through 4 and the 2 main SATs. After that, you'll see a transition slide and you'll see medium-paced answer explanations for practice tests 5 and 6. And then you'll see some faster answer explanations that are taken from practice tests 7, 8, and 9. They're going to come from videos where I solve those whole practice tests in 10 minutes with answer explanations. Keep in mind where it says answer explanations, that also is going to include tips, tricks, and strategies that I use on the SAT in order to be very efficient. So with that, let's go and get started with the slow down and in-depth answer explanations. So we have question 9 is what we're going to start with today. All right, so right off the bat, I see I have a column of equations, which means I'm probably going to be using addition or subtraction to get rid of a variable. I read my question. It says, what is the solution xy to the system of equations above? Well, in order to do this, what I'm going to do is I notice that all of my x's are different. So I'm going to make sure I can get rid of my y here in order to solve for my x right away to get my answer choice right away. Because if I solve for y, I have 2 -6's, so that doesn't really help me because then I'll have to solve for x as well. And I only want to solve for 1 because that's faster. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I can get rid of my y. I see if I multiply my bottom equation by 2, then I have 2 times 2y, which gives me 4y. And then if I subtract my bottom equation from my top equation, I'll have 4y minus 4y, and that will get rid of my y's, so I can find x very easily. All right, so here's what I got to do. I have to multiply this 2 by this negative x as well, and then also by this minus 19, so keep that in mind. All right, so I know that I'm going to have 2 times 2y, that's 4y. 4y minus 4y is 0, so I can get rid of my y's. Next, I'll have 3x minus 2 times negative x. Well, 2 times negative x is negative 2x, but we have to subtract that negative 2x, which means we're adding 2x. So we have 3x plus 2x, that's going to give me 5x. All right, that's going to equal my negative 23, and then we have negative 23 minus 2 times negative 19. 2 times negative 19 is going to give me negative 38, but keep in mind we have to subtract that, so negative 38 is a plus 38, so negative 23 plus 38 gives me positive 15. I divide each side by 5, and I see that my x then is going to equal 15 over 5, which is 3, so my answer choice has to be B, right? All right, so things to put in your notes there. The big thing that I saw is I needed to solve for x first, because then I didn't have to solve for y, right? So make sure you put that in your notes, that if you're asked for the solution x, y, and you see that one of them, whether it be x or y, has all different numbers, solve for that one first, because then you know the answer choice without having to solve for the other variable. Right, so in this case, I wanted to solve for x first, because by solving for x, I don't have to solve for y. So put that in your notes. The other thing you should put in your notes is this trick right here, but you should already have it. So if you already have it, don't worry about putting it back in your notes, because it's the same trick we've talked about before. And then as far as any other tricks, I don't really believe that there is any. The big thing here was just making sure that we solved for the x variable instead of the y variable, because then we didn't have to solve for y. All right, question 10. For the function g defined above, a is a constant and g of 4 is equal to 8. What is the value of g of negative 4? Okay, well, g of 4 just means we're plugging in 4 for x. So when we do that, we're going to have 4 squared. Now if we plug in negative 4 for g of negative 4, we're going to have negative 4 squared. Well, 4 squared is equal to 16, and negative 4 squared is also equal to 16. Therefore, we know that if g of 4 is 8, we know that g of negative 4 also has to equal 8. I'm going to show you why in a little bit more detail right here. So if g of 4 is 8, then whatever a is just getting multiplied by that 16, and we're adding 24 to it. Now, if if g is negative 4, then once again, that negative 4 squared just becomes 16, so we'll just have a times 16, and we're also adding that 24. So they're both going to equal the same answer, and they're both going to equal 8. So as far as things to put in your notes for that one, the big thing is understanding that if we're asked to solve for g of a number, and then also g of a negative number, or something like that, and it's squared, or it's to the 4th power, or to the 6th power, or anything to an even power, if it's anything to an even power, it's going to be the same number. If it's a negative, for example, negative 2 squared, that's going to give us 4. 2 squared is also going to give us 4. So it won't matter if it's negative or positive. If it's raised to an even power, it will always be positive and it will be the same number. So make sure you put that in your notes for number 10. All right, number 11. We've got two equations stacked up, but in this case we have a word problem, so we might not be using any addition and subtraction rules, but we'll see. And the equations above, B and C, represents the price per pound in dollars of beef and chicken, respectively, X weeks after July 1st during last summer. What was the price per pound of beef when it was equal to the price per pound of chicken? Okay, what we have to do is we have to set these two equations up here equal to each other because we're asked for the price per pound of beef when it's equal to the price per pound of chicken. Right, so the price per pound of beef is B and the price per pound of chicken is C, and they have to equal each other. So we're going to have 2.35 plus 0.25x is equal to 1.75 plus 0.4x. Now what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and subtract our 1.75 from each side. Right, subtract 1.75 from each side. That way we can get all of our x's onto one side. We subtract 0.25x from each side. Once again, notice how I'm keeping x positive by subtracting the smaller coefficient in front of x to keep x positive. So when I do that, I'm going to have 0.15x is equal to 0.6. I divide each side by 0.15, divide each side by 0.15, and we see that 0.6 over 0.15 is 4. Therefore, our x has to equal 4. Keep in mind, if there was an answer choice 4 in A through D, that isn't going to be our correct answer because we're asked for the price per pound of beef when it's equal to the price per pound of chicken, which means we have to plug in a 4 in either equation and solve for what that price equals. So another thing that you should put in your notes is I'm going to pick that 0.25 because I know that it's easily multiplied by 4 to get to 1. Right? So we want to make sure we're picking the easier equation to manipulate. So in this case, since we had to multiply by 4, if we have something that's 1/4, like 0.25 is, I want to pick that equation. So now when I pick that, I'm going to have 2.35 plus 1/4 times 4, which is 1. So I'll have 3.35 as my answer. So my answer there is going to be D. So things to put in your notes there. Right here, this equation here is really just understanding simple algebra. So we're going to isolate x to one side and set it equal to a constant, then solving for that constant. But we need to make sure we're paying attention to what the questions ask because it could have very easily put in a 4.00 right here, and that would have been wrong because we're asked for when it's equal to the price per pound of chicken. So we had to plug in that 4. All right, question 12. A line in the xy plane passes through the origin and has a slope of 1/7. Which of the following points lies on the line? All right, well, if I know that I have a slope of 1/7 and I know I pass through the origin, that's the key part with this, is that it passes through the origin. That means my y-intercept is 0, so it's going to be plus 0, which means that y is just equal to 1/7 x. So now I'm given points. So what I'm looking for as I go through these points is I know that my y is going to have to be less than what my x is, right? Because whatever my x is, it's getting multiplied by 1/7, so it's getting smaller. So anything where y is greater than what x is, I can get rid of. So I can get rid of a, I can get rid of b, and I can get rid of c as well because they're equal there, right? And I know that my x has to be greater than my y since my x is getting multiplied by a fraction that is less than 1. So my answer there is going to be D because that is my only answer choice where my x variable is larger than my y. Right, so the big thing that we need to understand here is kind of relationships. So you should put in your notes something about recognizing a relationship when it's a question about points, because once you can recognize that relationship, you can get rid of the 3 wrong answer choices. If I had to plug in 0, 7, 1, 7, and 7, 7, and 14 and 2, that would take me a long time to check. What's much simpler and much faster and more efficient is if I can just recognize that my x variable has to be greater than my y since my x is multiplied by that fraction. So making sure you can understand relationships and using those relationships to get rid of wrong answer choices is big on the SAT math section, and I would recommend putting something in your notes about that, about using relationships to get rid of wrong answer choices. All right, question 13. So question 13 is one that takes a bit more effort to solve. There's not necessarily a super quick trick to it, and it can look a little bit challenging at first, and it is a little bit challenging. One thing you should know about the SAT math no calculator section and the math with calculator section is that it gets progressively harder as you go on. So as you go from 1 to 15 on the SAT no calculator section, it's going to get harder. Now once you get to 16, 17, and 18, it gets easier actually. So one thing that I'll teach as we go over pacing and strategy later on is to get to about 10, like go through problems 1 through 10, and then switch and do 16 through 18 then. Because 16 through 18 are generally easier to do than problems 10 through 15 are. So I recommend doing 1 through 9 and then 16 through 18, then going back and doing 10 through 15, and then wrapping it up with those last 2 free response questions. But I'll teach that later on more in depth, and that will be with pacing videos. So for 13, if x is greater than 3, which of the following is equivalent to 1 over x plus 2 plus 1 over x plus 3? All right, well, what we have to do here is we have to multiply by x plus 2 times x plus 3 over x plus 2 times x plus 3. And the reason that we have to do that is because our least common denominator is going to have to be our x plus 2 times our x plus 3 in here. All right, so we have to do that. Keep in mind that this is equal to 1 when we multiply by this, right? Because everything here would cancel out. So when we do this, we're keeping that 1 up top, right? So we still have a 1 up top, and now we're going to multiply this right here. So when we do this, we have to keep in mind that we have to distribute this whole thing right here, right? This whole box I'm putting around right now. We have to distribute that here and then also here since we have an addition sign here. So when we do that, we're going to have our x plus 2 is going to cancel with our bottom x plus 2, and we're going to have an x plus 3 up top and an x plus 2 times x plus 3 on the bottom. And then in our next one, so when we distribute it to this equation here, we know our x plus 3 will cancel, so then we'll have that much plus an x plus 2 over x plus 2 times x plus 3. Okay, now keep in mind we still have a 1 up top. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect this, right? We can get rid of this then because they have the same denominator. It's just going to come right here, right? So we'll have x plus 2 times x plus 3. Now we're going to add what's right here. So we have to add these two terms, right? Now when we do that, we see that that's going to give us, before we go ahead and add it, I'm actually going to go ahead and flip it. So one thing that you can recognize is when we have this 1 up here and we're dividing like this, what you need to do is you need to take your bottom term and just put it above what's in the middle, and then that will get you your answer since you have a 1 right here, right? Since this is a 1, our correct answer is going to take this x plus 2 times x plus 3, and we're just going to put that over what was in our middle there, which is that x plus 3 plus x plus 2, which when we add that is just going to give us 2x plus 5. So we know our answer for 13 is going to have to be answer choice B. And then as far as things to put in your notes for this one actually has a lot you should put in your notes, and I would actually recommend putting this whole problem in your notes. So you can put the whole problem in your notes, or you could just put something saying C page and then whatever page you're on, problem 13 in workbook for notes on question 13. Because this is one that you're going to probably want to know if you're shooting for a high score, so above 700s in the math section, you're going to want to be able to do this problem because this is one of the more challenging problems. All right, so what you got to know is when we're given, and I'm going to erase a little bit here. So when we're given this problem right here, this 1 over 1, x plus 2 over x plus 3, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to identify our common denominator. That's going to be our x plus 3 times our x plus 2. Okay, so we have to multiply then by x plus 2 times x plus 3 over x plus 2 times x plus 3. So when we do that then, our x plus 2 down here is going to cancel with our x plus 2 up here. That's how we get that x plus 3 over x plus 2 times x plus 3. Okay, and then when we multiply this big box here by this right here, our x plus 3 is going to cancel, and what we're going to be left with is this x plus 2 over x plus 2 over x plus 3. So now that we've done that, that brings us to right here, right? Now once we're at this point, when we have 1 over a number and then over another number, what that means is we have to flip this bottom number up to our top, and then since this is a 1, it doesn't matter, we can just ignore it. And then we take this x plus 3 plus x plus 2 and we bring it down. So we're just flipping these two numbers, right? So a simple example that you could put in your notes if you would like to would be if we were to do 1 over 2 over 4. Right? If we were going to do that, we know that our final answer, well, this is 1 divided by 2 over 4. 2 over 4 is 1/2. 1 divided by 1/2 is 1 times 2, so that would give us 2. So we see that all we have to do then is flip this 4 and flip this 2, and that would give us 4 over 2, which also gives us 2. So this is a more simple example that I would recommend putting in your notes if you don't want to put in that whole problem. All right, question 14. If 3x minus y equals 12, what is the value of 8 to the power of x over the power 2 to the power y, or over 2 to the power y? So big tip I have here is if we have any sort of exponents, right, raised to the power, and the power is a variable, we want to be looking to get that same base, right? If we can get to the same base, we can get to our answer. So right away, what I'm looking at as well is if I have if 3x minus y equals 12, I'm looking to get my exponents then to be 3x minus y, because I know that that's really what it's trying to get us to do. It's trying to get us to convert this 8 into a 2 to the power of 3x, right? Because 8 is equal to 2 to the third power, because 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 again is 8. They want us to do 2 to the power of 3x because that is equal to 8 to the power of x. So when we do that, we have 2 to the power of 3x over 2 to the power of y, and that's going to give us 2 raised to the power of 3x minus y since we're dividing, right? So since we're dividing, we're going to take the power that we have in our numerator and subtract the power we have in our denominator. Well, we know now that 3x minus y is 12, so we can say that that then is equal to 2 to the 12, and we get our answer choice A as our correct answer there. So things you should put in your notes from 14 is understanding that when we have exponents, when our exponents are variables, we need to look to get to the same base, right? That's pretty much a hint that you want to get to a same base is if you have variables as your exponents, especially if they are multiplied or divided like this, right? If they're multiplied or divided, we want to make sure we're getting to that same base. And even more so if we see that we have an if statement before it, right? And if we have an if statement before it, we want to get those exponents to our if statement. So we know our answer there is going to be A. All right, question 15. If a x plus 2 times the quantity bx plus 7 equals 15x squared plus cx plus 14 for all values of x and a plus b equals 8, what are two possible values for c? All right, big things that I'm seeing here is whenever I'm given a two variables equal in number, that means I'm probably looking at a pattern, right? A pattern of some sort or two rules of equations I have to follow. So in this case, I have a plus b is equal to 8. I'm asked to solve for the two possible values of c, right? I know that the possible values of c are going to depend on what a and what b are, because those are my coefficients that get multiplied by this 2 and that get multiplied by this 7. So I need to solve for a and b, but one thing I also know is that ax times bx gives me an x squared, which means this 15 has to equal a times b. So ab has to equal 15. Okay, well now I'm just going to kind of take a look and see if I can come up with some good numbers here. Well, I see a plus b equals 8, so immediately I would be thinking what things that multiply to get 15 also add to get 8. And immediately I think 3 times 5 equals 15, and they also add to 8, right? Now keep in mind, I'm asked for two possible values of c, which means that I can pick either 3 or 5 for a. It can be 3 or 5, and it will have to be 3 or 5. I have to use both because I have to solve for both possible values for c. Oh, but wait a minute. Do we really have to solve for both possible values of c? Well, let's think about it. Well, we can actually check. We don't even have to think about it because we're just going to have to do it anyways. But let's go and find one possible value for c. And if there's no other answer choices that match it, we don't have to find the other because it has to be that answer, right? So we're not going to waste time checking work. We're just going to go ahead and get to our correct answer as fast as we can. So let's plug in a 3 for a, and let's plug in a 5 for b. All right, if we do that, we're going to have 3x then times 7. That's going to give us 21x. Then we're going to have this 5x times this 2, and that's going to give us plus 10x, which means we're going to have 31x. So the possible values for c then are going to be 31. 31 has to be a possible value. And look at that, 31. That's only in D, therefore D is going to be my correct answer no matter what. I'm not even going to bother checking 41, except at the end after I've answered all of my questions because I want to maximize my chances at points. So D will be my answer for 15. So as far as things to put in your notes there, understanding that we want to get here. This is what I wanted to get to from this equation. When I saw that I had a constant or a variable next to one of my exponents, or not an exponent, next to one of my x's, one of my variables here, I wanted to look for, and I was given this, right? So this was also a hint, this a plus b equals 8. If I'm given equations in addition to equations, I want to make sure that I'm looking for a relationship because that's usually a sign that there's going to be a relationship. So in this case, it was a plus b being equal to 8. And then I also wanted to use everything else that this problem told me, which was that 15 had to equal a times b. And then I wanted to quickly solve for possible solutions, which I did, and then plug them in and solve for the answer. So making sure that we're not wasting time checking answers either. Notice how I didn't check 41. I just took my right answer and I moved on. All right, so those are the big things for the math no calc. So we're going to go ahead and get started with question 9 on the no calculator section. All right, so we have a stack of equations up top, which means that it's possible we could be looking to add or subtract, but not definite, right? So we don't know for sure that's what we'll have to do. So we have in the system of equations above, k is a constant and x and y are variables. For what value of k will the system of equations have no solution? All right, well, since my y term here is different, right, since this 4 and this 7 is different, then if they have the same slope, then they're never going to intersect and there will be no solution. So slope is determined by our y's and our x's, right? It's determined by the ratio of y to x, So put that in your notes, that slope is the ratio of your y to your x, right? Of your change in y to your change in x. So what this means then is that if they have the same ratio, right? If the same x to y ratio is present in each equation and they're set equal to a different number, then they will have equivalent slopes like this, right? But they'll have different y-intercepts, which means that they will never intersect, right? So they won't ever intersect. So there will be no solution then. So if we look at our equation down here, we have 5y and we have 4x, or we have negative 5y and 4x. So if we multiply this negative 5y by what, right? By what fraction to get our negative 3y? Well, we see that we're going to have to multiply, and we can actually just go ahead and call this x, right? So negative 5y times x equals negative 3y. We divide each side by negative 5y, right? Divide each side by negative 5y. We see that our y's are going to cancel there. Our y's cancel, our negatives cancel, and we're left with 3/5. So we have to multiply this equation down here by 3/5, right? And we only have to multiply this 4x because we just have to solve for k. So we multiply 4 by 3/5. So we have 3 over 5 times 4, which is 4 over 1. We're going to end with 12 over 5. So A will be our answer for number 9. So what you need to put in your notes is that slope is going to be your ratio of change in y to your change in x. So what you want to be able to do then is understand that with an equation set up like this, where you're set equal not to y, but to a constant number, that if you're asked for a no solution, if they have different numbers here, then you just need to make sure that they have the same slope by having the same ratio of x to y, right? So that's what you should have in your notes for number 9. So answer to number 9 is going to be A. All right, moving on to question 10 now. Question 10. In the xy plane, the parabola with equation x minus 11 squared intersects the line with equation y equals 25 at 2 points A and B. What is the length A and B of A to B? All right, well, one thing that we know is that with a parabola, right, we're going to do the same thing on each side of it, right? So we increase by the same on each side, right? Or decrease by the same on each side if our parabola looks like this, right? So what we can do is we can take the fact that y equals 25, and we'll plug that in for our y right here. So we have 25 equals x minus 11 squared. Now if I square root each side, I see that I have 5 is equal to x minus 11, which means I'm going to add 11 to each side. And I see that I have a 16 is equal to x. But what I need to also understand is that to get this this root 25, the square root of 25, that's going to be plus or minus 5, right? So in this case, I did plus 5, so I end with that. Now if I have minus 5, then I have minus 5 equals x minus 11. I add 11 to each side, add 11 to each side, and I get that 6 equals x, right? But I'm not asked for the 16 here. That's incorrect. And I'm not asked for 6. I'm asked for the length of A to B. So that's going to be the distance between these 2 points, right? And we see that the distance between 16 and 6 is 16 minus 6, which is 10. So our answer there is A. So what you want to understand for this problem is that we want to plug in this 25 for y. So if we're given what a variable equals, we're going to plug it in. The next thing we need to understand is that we had this x minus 11 squared. We wanted to square root that to get rid of that squared. And then at that point, we had to understand that if we're taking the square root of a positive number like this, so example would be positive 64. If we're taking the square root of that, that's going to be plus or minus 8. So we have to do it for both this plus 5 and then also this minus 5. All right, so keeping in mind then that we have to have this plus minus relationship up here. So you should put that plus minus relationship in your notes. And then once again, paying attention to what we're asked at the end of the question is important. All right, question 11. So this one, there's definitely going to be some stuff you should put in your notes on. So in the figure above, lines K, L, and M intersect at a point. If x plus y equals u plus w, which of the following must be true? Okay, this is a very, very important term. This must here means that it has to be true. Not can it be true, but must be true. It has to be true in this context of this situation. So we have 3 statements. So we're just going to go through down the line 1, 2, 3. And that's what I recommend you do. So if you want to put that in your notes as well, go ahead and do that. We're going to take each one on its own and figure out whether it's true or false, right? Does it have to be true? Does it must be true? Well, let's see here. So we got our first one is x equals z. Well, the first thing that I'm going to do is I was told that x plus y equals u plus w. So I'm going to draw this indicating that u plus w is equal to x plus y. I also know that my u equals my y, my w equals my t, and my z has to equal my w, right? Because those are, they are, right, we have this L to this M, that means that the angle here has to be the same as well. So then what I know is I know that my z, right, go ahead and get rid of this a little bit. We have x equals z. Well, does x equal z? Well, here's what we know. We know that these z and this t, they have to equal each other because our x and y here plus whatever z is equals 180, and then our u and w here plus whatever t equals 180. And we know that x and y, x plus y and w plus u are the same, therefore z and t have to be the same. So 3 is going to be correct. We can go ahead and say that because we figured that out. But we have to know if x is equal to z. So what we know is we know that t is equal to z, and we know that x has to equal t because those two, right, they're alternate angles right here. Or, I can't remember what it's called, the word for this angle, but anytime that you have an angle like this, right, these two angles are going to be the same, and then these angles here will be the same. I can't remember what it's called, but just understand that, right? So you got these angles are the same, and these larger angles are the same. So by that, we know that x is going to equal t, and since we already stated that z equals t, therefore x also has to equal z, so that's true. Now we have y equals w. Well, we don't know if y equals w or not. It's possible that they could equal, but they don't have to. We know that y is equal to u, and we know that x plus y has to equal u plus w, right? So since y is equal to u, we know that x has to equal w, but we don't know that y has to equal w. So 2 is incorrect. So our answer is going to be 1 and 3, which is answer choice B. So as far as things to put in your notes, this right here, understanding that this angle must equal this angle, and then this angle here must equal this angle. All right, next thing, you should put in your notes this 1, 2, 3. If we're given a problem with a 1, a 2, and a 3 like this, go ahead and make sure that you make a judgment on each one, right? So which one's true, which one's false, all of that. All right, there's no shortcut for that, really. All right, now we've got question 12. In the quadratic equation above, a is a non-zero constant. Okay, this means it can't be 0, it has to be a number. It can be positive or negative. The graph of the equation in the xy plane is parabola with vertex CD. Which of the following is equal to D? All right, well, what we know is we know that we have D is going to be our vertex. So the graph of the equation in the quadratic equation above. Okay, so what we can say is we can find this C coordinate because we're given our zeros, right? So we know that our zeros have to be at x equals 2 and at x equals negative 4, right? Since we have an x plus 4, that means the 0 is at negative 4, and since we have an x minus 2, we have a 0 at 2. Therefore, our vertex has to be in between our zeros, okay? So our vertex is going to be in the middle of our zeros, which will be at negative 1. So now we're going to plug in that negative 1 for x. So now we have negative 1 minus 2, and we have that times negative 1 plus 4. Well, negative 1 minus 2 gets us negative 3, and negative 1 plus 4 gives us positive 3. So now we're going to multiply those together, and then we also have to multiply by this a right here. So we see that we're going to end with a negative 9a, so our answer is going to be answer choice A. So as far as what to understand for this, I would put this in your notes. If you're given an equation like this, right, this y equals a, x minus 2, x plus 4, immediately recognize that your vertex has to be in between your zeros. So we know that a 0 is going to be at x equals 2, and a 0 will be at x equals negative 4. Then our vertex has to be equal to a 2 minus 4 over 2, right? And if we do that, we see that that's negative 2 over 2, which is negative 1. So understanding that our vertex is going to be the sum of our zeros divided by the number of zeros that we have, I do believe. So in this case, we take our zeros and we find our in-between point, right? Or I'm sorry, it shouldn't be divided by the number of zeros that we have. It should be divided by our 2 here, right? So if we have a parabola, so a parabola, keep in mind, looks like this, right? Our midpoint has to be in between the 2, so we're going to divide it by 2. So we're going to get it right there. All right, so that answers A. Now we got question 13. Okay, so the equation, and then we have this big old equation here, is equal to some other number. It's true for all values where x does not equal 2 over a. A is a constant. What is the value of a? Okay, one thing to understand just about how they got for all values, x does not equal 2 over a, and you should understand this, so put this in your notes for sure. Since we have a denominator here, right, we have a a parabola up here, and we have it divided by a number, we have to set our denominator equal to 0, right? And it really can't equal 0. So then we're going to go ahead and add 2 to each side, and we get that 2, and then we have to divide by a, right? So now we're left with x cannot equal 2 over a. So you should put that in your notes just because there could be a question on what x cannot equal, right? And you need to understand that you take the denominator, you set it equal to 0, and then you solve for what x cannot equal. So in this case, x can't equal 2 over a. All right, well, now we're asked for the value of a. Well, what I know is I know that this right here, and I'm going to erase this a minute, this right here is a division problem, right? So I'm going to have ax minus 2 going into this 24x squared plus 25x minus 47. And then what I have to do now is I have to solve for a. So I know that that equals negative 8x minus 3, negative 8x minus 3, and then that we have a remainder, right? This minus 53, there's a minus sign there. That's our remainder. But I can solve this only using the first term because I know that my first term is negative 8x. The question is negative 8x times ax gives me 24x squared. Well, what does a have to be then? A has to be negative 3 because negative 8 times negative 3 gives me 24. So what I would do to solve for this is I would do a 24 over that negative 8. That would give me negative 3, and I know that negative 3 will be my answer, so my answer has to be B for 13. So as far as things to put in your notes for 13, what I would recommend putting in your notes is what I said about this denominator being set equal to 0 in order to solve for what x can't equal, because we haven't covered that yet and you need to know that. The next thing I would put in your notes is understanding this division, right? So if we have our denominator, we're going to put that right here. Our numerator, we're going to put that underneath this division sign here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to multiply our first term by this term, and it has to equal that first term underneath this division sign. So you should put that in your notes. And then also, once again, paying attention to how I do this. Keep in mind, I went ahead and I solved with this first term, right? I'm not doing the whole problem because I don't need to. We're doing the least amount of work we need to get to the right answer on every problem. That's very important for the SAT math section. So what are the solutions to 3x squared plus 12x plus 6 equals 0? Okay, what I would look to do is I would look to do some factoring, but what I see is I see this, right? Anytime I see a plus or minus and then any sort of square roots, or even really just any sort of plus or minus, so a number and then plus or minus another number, I am thinking of the quadratic equation, which is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, right? So anytime I see a plus or minus sign with a square root or any number and a plus or minus sign, I'm thinking I have to use this. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I know that b is going to be that 12 right there. I know a will be a 3, and I know c will be a 6. So I'm going to have a negative b, so negative 12 plus or minus the square root b squared. That's going to be 12 squared, which is 144. And then minus 4 times a is 3. 4 times 3 gives me 12. Keep in mind that this is negative, so we have negative 12 now times c. Hang on a minute. We've got negative 12, negative 12 times c, which is 6. 6 times negative 12 brings me that negative 72, right? And then that's all over 2 times a is 3, 2 times 3 gives me 6. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and solve. So I have negative 12 over 6, that's going to give me negative 2. The next thing, so I can go ahead and get rid of c and d. Now I see I have to solve for my next term. I'm going to have plus or minus. Well, 144 minus 72 is going to give me root 72. Now what I have to do is I have to factor this out, right? So I can take a 2 out and put a 36 here. This is called a factor tree. If you don't know factor trees, put it in your notes because you're going to need to know it. Then we can split that into 2 and 18, right? Because 2 times 18 equals 36. We can split that into 2 and 9, and then we can split 9 into 3 and 3. So now what you're going to do, since this is a square root, right, you're going to take out your 3's. So any pairs you have, since this is a square root, you can take out. So now you're going to have a 3 times a 2 with 1 root 2 left underneath that square root. So what you're going to end with then is going to be x equals negative 2 plus or minus 2 times 3 from right here, which is 6. And then we have 1 root 2 remaining right here. So 6 root 2. Keep in mind that this is all over that 6. That 6 cancels, and we see we're left with x equals negative 2 plus or minus root 2. So our answer has to be A. All right, so things you need to put in your notes is making sure that we recognize if we have a plus or minus right here. So if we have a constant, a plus or minus, and a square root, especially if there's a square root, we want to use this quadratic equation, right? Another thing, if it's not a square root, you still might be able to use the quadratic equation if you see that plus or minus. So if you have a constant, a plus or minus, look to use your quadratic equation for that. All right, now we've got question 15. The equation above shows how a temperature F measured in degrees Fahrenheit relates to a temperature C measured in degrees Celsius. Based on the equation, which of the following must be true? Okay, so once again, we have a question where we have a 1, a 2, and a 3. So we have to go through our 1, 2, and 3, and we have to solve for what must be true. Keep, again, paying attention to that it says must be true. Not can be true, but must be true. So they have to be true. All right, well, if I look at my number 1, we have a temperature increase of 1 degree Fahrenheit. So if we increased F by 1, it's equivalent to a temperature increase of 5/9 degrees Celsius. Well, that is going to be true because if we were to simplify this, we would distribute here and here, and we would see we would have C equals 5/9 F plus some number. So if we increase our degrees Fahrenheit by 1, we increase our degrees Celsius by 5/9. So 1 is true. So we'll put a check mark there. Number 2, a temperature increase of 1 degree Celsius is equivalent to a temperature increase of 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit. That is also true, and here's how I get to that. If I was to increase by 1 degree Celsius, how much would I increase by in Fahrenheit? Well, I'm going to multiply by 9/5 to each side to get rid of this, right? So now I have 9/5 times degrees Celsius gives me my degrees Fahrenheit minus 32, right? So that's going to be 9/5 times my degrees Celsius, and I can go ahead and add 32 to each side at this point just to get it equal to F. So I have 32 plus 9/5 times the degrees Celsius gives me my degrees Fahrenheit. So an increase of 1 degree Celsius is 9/5 increase in degrees Fahrenheit. 9/5 is equal to 1.8. So 2 will be true as well. And then 3, a temperature increase of 5/9 degrees Fahrenheit is equal to a temperature increase of 1 degrees Fahrenheit. We can get rid of 3 already because we already stated that a temperature increase of 1 degree Fahrenheit is equal to an increase of 5/9 degrees Celsius, right? If we were to increase the degrees Fahrenheit by 5/9, then we would be increasing our degrees Celsius by less than that since we're multiplying by that fraction of 5/9. All right, so that takes care of the no calculator section. So our answer for number 15, that's going to be that 1 and 2 are true. So our answer there is going to be D. So let me go ahead and get my pen going. That'll be D for number 15. All right, so now let's go ahead and get started with question 9 on the no calculator section. So the graph of a line in the xy plane has a slope of 2 and contains the point 1 and 8. The graph of a second line passes through the points 1, 2, and 2, 1. If the two lines intersect at AB, what is the value of A plus B? So we want to make sure that we're adding that A to the B to get to our final answer. Well, our first equation, we see that we have a slope of 2, so it's going to be 2 times whatever x is. We see our x is 1. And then plus whatever our intercept is going to equal 8 then it says, because y it says is 8. So we do that, we get then that 8 is equal to 2 plus b, right? We subtract 2 from each side. 8 minus 2 leaves us with 6, so that 6 then is going to equal our b. So now we can go ahead and write our equation for our first line. We know that it has to be y equals 2x because our slope is 2 plus 6 because we solved for 6 as our y-intercept. Now our next equation, we see that we have points 1, 2, and then 2, 1. So we see that if we were to go and increase our x by 1, we're going to decrease our y by 1. Well, that means if we were to go from 0 to 1 then, that we would have to add 1, right? Because we're going in the reverse direction. So that means that we're going to have point 0, 3. So 0, 3 tells us that we have a y-intercept then of plus 3, right? And we have a slope we see of negative 1 because when we go from 1 to 2, we go down in our y from 2 to 1. So we have negative x plus 3 as our other equation. So we're asked where they intercept. So if we're going to solve where they're going to intercept here, we're going to set our equations equal to each other. So we'll do this negative x plus 3. It has to equal that 2x plus 6. Right, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to add x to each side to keep our coefficient in front of x positive. We get 3x. Now we're going to minus 6 from each side to set x equal to a constant. 3 minus 6 gives us negative 3, and we see that our x then is going to equal negative 1 because we divide each side by 3, and that will give us negative 3 over 3, which is negative 1. So our x is going to be negative 1. Keep in mind that that is not our answer because we have to have a plus b. Right, so now we just plug that negative 1 in our equation for y equals 2x plus 6. 2 times negative 1. 2 times negative 1 is going to give us negative 2, and then negative 2 plus 6 is going to give us a positive 4. So now we have to add a to b. We know that a is negative 1, and we know that b is our positive 4. Negative 1 plus 4 is going to give us positive 3. So our answer there is going to be answer choice B. All right, moving on to question 10. Question 10. Which of the following equations has a graph in the xy plane for which y is always greater than or equal to negative 1? All right, this means y has to be greater than or equal to negative 1. Let's go ahead and look through our answer choices. Well, we have y is equal to absolute value of x minus 2. Well, this minus 2 here means, and since this can have a minimum of 0, means our minimum is going to be at negative 2, which is less than negative 1, and we need greater than or equal to, so we can get rid of a. If we look at b, we have x squared minus 2. Once again, this has a minimum of 0. 0 minus 2 also has a minimum of negative 2, so that is incorrect. We look at choice C, and we have y equals x minus 2 squared, for which y is always greater than or equal to negative 1. And we see that C there is going to be our correct answer, right? Because if we were to look at our graph, basically what's in here is going to, since it's squared, right? Since this quantity here is going to get squared, this is going to be a negative number or a positive number, but since it's squared, it's always going to be positive. So it will always be greater than or equal to negative 1 since it is squared, right? Same thing if it was raised to the 4th power or if it was raised to the 8th power or the 6th power. As long as it's raised to an even power, any number raised to an even power is going to be positive. Therefore, it will be greater than or equal to negative 1. So C is going to be our correct answer there. This one right here, x cubed, that's going to look something like this on your graph. Right, so here's your y-axis, here's your x-axis. It looks something like that. Right, so that one is going to be incorrect because we see that that will definitely be in the negatives. All right, so our answer for 10 is going to be C. As far as things to put in your notes, for question 10, one thing that I would put in your notes is the graph of x cubed, right? So x cubed will look something like this. You'll have an arrow going down, it'll come up, and then it'll go something like that. So I would put that in your notes, just so that you understand what x cubed looks like. X cubed will look something like that, right? In this case, it was minus 2, so we would have our intercept be right here, but that's not really what I need you to put in your notes. I just want you to see the shape of an x cubed graph. Right? And then the other thing you should have in your notes is that any number squared is going to equal a positive, right? So if you have any number squared, that will give you a positive. So you should put those in your notes, and those are really the big things that we should put in our notes for number 10. Question 11, which of the following complex numbers is equivalent to, we have this 3 minus 5i over 8 plus 2i. So what we have to do here is we have to multiply by our conjugate, right? We have to do our complex conjugate. So we have all over 8 plus 2i. We multiply then by 8 minus 2i over 8 minus 2i. Okay, so when we do this, we're going to go ahead and do our bottom first. So we're going to have this 8 times this 8, right? And that's going to give us 64. Then we're going to have a plus 8 times 2i. So that's going to give us plus 16i. And then we're going to have a minus 2i times 8, right? And that's going to give us minus 16i. So we see our middle terms are going to cancel. Then we're going to have this plus 2i times a minus 2i. And that's going to give us minus 4i squared. But I squared is negative 1, so that minus 4, right? I'll go ahead and write it right here. We'd have minus 4i squared. I squared is negative 1, so we multiply by negative 1, and that gives us plus 4. Okay, so our denominator then is going to equal 68, right? So we'll put 68 on the bottom here. One thing I notice off the bat is that none of my answer choices have a denominator of 68. They have it of 34, so I'm probably going to have something divisible by 2 up top, more than likely. All right, so now I go up top and I do my multiplication here. So I have a 3 times a 5, that's going to give me a 24. Then I'm sorry, 3 times 8, that gives me 24. Then I have a minus 5i times 8, that gives me minus 40i. Then I have a minus 5i times minus 2i. That's going to give me a positive 10i squared, so positive 10i squared. And then I'm going to have a minus 2i times this 3 here. That's going to give me minus 6i. So I see that I will have 24 minus 46i, and then plus 10i squared becomes minus 10 because I squared is negative. So minus 10, so that's going to leave me with 14 minus 46i because 24 minus 10 is 14. All right, so that's going to be my numerator, is 14 minus 46i. So I have 14 minus 46i over 68. Okay, so what jumps out to me immediately is that everything here is divisible by 2, so I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll have 7 minus 23i, and that's all going to be over 34. So I have 7 over 34 minus 23i over 34. So I'll just go ahead and find my answer that has that, and I see that that's answer choice C. So C will be my answer for number 11. So as far as things that we should put in our notes for number 11, the big thing that we want to put in our notes here is just remembering that I squared equals negative 1. Another thing you should put in your notes is just remembering how to multiply by this conjugate here to get rid of our imaginary numbers in our denominator. So we talked about this in our equation week where we did that 1 week where we covered math equations in the beginning. We talked about multiplying by that complex conjugate to get rid of the imaginary number in the denominator, so that's what we did here. So if you want to put that in your notes, you can. You should already have it there, though. And then understanding I squared equals negative 1, understanding that to simplify. And then finally, just understanding that we see a common denominator of 2 and 14, 46, and 68, so we divide by 2 to get to our simplified answer of C. So one other thing you could put in your notes is just making sure that you don't freak out if you don't see your denominator in any of your answer choices. You just need to understand that you have to find something to simplify by then. So more than likely you did the problem right, you just have to simplify. So understand that as well. All right, so that takes us through 11. Now we got question 12. A website uses the formula above to calculate a seller's rating R. We've got, really just look down here, we have which of the following expresses the number of favorable reviews in terms of the other variables. Anytime that we see this up here where we have all of these variables and not really any numbers, we usually want to just skip down here and see if we're just asked to rearrange, which we see we are. We're just asked to see what f is equal to. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and solve for f. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to erase that. I got to multiply each side by n plus f. Get rid of that. N plus f, and I'm going to zoom in here real quick so you can see that better. All right, multiply each side by n plus f. Hang on a minute. All right, this is glitching. So I'm going to zoom back out. All right, so we have n plus f. Now we're going to multiply it by this r, right? So we're going to have fr, and we're going to have nr. So now we have nr plus fr equals f. So now I'm going to subtract fr from each side, and you'll see why, because I want to get all my f's on one side, since I'm trying to solve for what f equals. So I subtract fr from each side, so now I have f minus fr. Get rid of this here. So I have nr equals f minus fr. Now what I can do here in order to get what f equals is I can factor out my f, since f is present here and here. I can multiply by 1 minus r. When I do that, I still have f minus fr, so that works there. So my f1 minus r is going to equal that nr. So now what I got to do is I got to divide each side by that quantity 1 minus r. I see that that cancels right here, and then I put this side over that 1 minus r, and now I have what f equals. So f is going to equal nr over 1 minus r. Or, I'm sorry, rn over 1 minus r, same thing. All right, so that's going to be answer choice B. All right, so as far as things to put in your notes right there, just give me 1 minute, quick check something. Okay, so as far as things to put in your notes there, understanding that if you're in a situation like this where you have to solve for a variable that is present in the numerator and the denominator and set equal to another variable, then what you're going to want to do is get it to something like this where you can factor it out, right? So you want to get all your f's on one side. Even if there's an addition or a subtraction sign in between, you want to make sure you're getting all of that variable on one side. Okay, so if you're asked to solve, put this in your notes. I'll give you a quote. So if asked to solve for a variable that is in, and that's going to be numerator, the numerator and denominator, then get all variables, or then get all the variables that you were asked to solve for, right? So by that I mean all of those f's that you are asked to solve for on one side. So in this case it was all the f's. Get all of those on one side. You were asked to solve for on one side. All right, so there's your quote you should put in your notes, right? So in this case, we wanted to get all those f's on one side so we could factor out the f with that 1 and then set f equal to rn over 1 minus r. So that's really what you should have in your notes there. And then once again, this showed up again, which you should already have in your notes from earlier, but understanding that if we see a question with a lot of variables up top, then we want to just skip to the end and check if it's just asking us to rearrange like it was here. So you saw me skip over this part. I made an error. I should have recognized immediately when I saw this that I should just skip to the end and check for if it's just setting variables equal to each other. I wasted time reading this first part of the sentence and I shouldn't have done that. So that was on me. That is my mistake. Once again, if you see that you have variables up top here, you should know that you're probably asked just to rearrange them. So then just skip down to the end question and see if that is what you're asked. And then it'll also be a tell if you see that you have a variable set equal to everything right here. So in that case, you can kind of skip over reading what they mean. All right, question 13. What is the sum of all values of m that satisfy 2m squared minus 16m plus 8 equals 0? All right, so this one is a little bit tricky. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to factor out this 2, right? So we're going to factor out the 2, and we're going to have m squared minus 8m, and then, oops, minus 8m, and then we're going to have a plus 4, right? That's going to equal 0. So I'm going to take this m squared minus 8m plus 4. I'm going to set it equal to 0. Okay, so I need the sum of my roots. Well, I know I'm going to have an m here, and I know I'm going to have an m here. Okay, that's equaling 0. All right, well, now I got to solve for my roots. So what I'm going to do here is I know that if I set that equal to it, I can call this m minus, we'll call this, we can call this x1, right? So we'll have m minus whatever this integer is here, and then we'll have m minus x2 here, right? That's going to be set equal to 0. Well, we know that this negative 8, that has to equal that negative x1 plus our negative x2 plus negative x2, or negative x1 minus x2 is the same thing, right? And we know that that has to equal our negative 8 because this negative 8 here stems from multiplying negative x1 by m and then also adding that negative x2 times m. So now that we do that, what we can do is we can make all of our signs positive since they're all negative right now, and we'll see that x1 plus x2 is equal to 8, right? And the other thing that you need to understand that that comes from is because this m minus x1, its root then when it's set equal to 0 is going to be that m equals positive x1, right? Because you would add x1 to each side. So that's how I did it quicker right here, but really as long as you understand that x1 plus x2 equals 8, and then understanding then that your x1s are going to have to get flipped since they were negative, I switched it to positive. As long as you understand that, you're good, and you see that your correct answer for 13 is going to be answer choice D, so it's going to be 8 right there. So we saw that we took this negative 8 here, and then we did some converting into our equation, right? It was going to be m and then m. We knew that because we have m squared. And then it was going to be minus some number and minus some number, and the sum of those minuses had to get us to negative 8, so we set that minus x1 and then plus that minus x2. We set that equal to that negative 8. We turned it all positive, and we saw that our x plus our x had to give us 8. So we knew that the sum of our roots then had to equal 8. So our answer there was D. So that one would be a good problem to put in your workbook for sure, because that's kind of an interesting one and a bit more difficult of one. So if you're really shooting for a high score, you should make sure that you're comfortable with that question there. All right, 14. A radioactive substance decays. Okay, this is important. We understand that we're decaying, so we're getting less over time at an annual rate of 13%. If the initial amount of the substance is 325 grams, which of the following functions models the remaining amount of the substance in grams t years later? All right, well, we're starting with 325. Okay, so we know that this has to be, our first term is 325, so we can get rid of C and D. Keep in mind that you should have the equation for exponential, or I'm sorry, not exponential, for radioactive decay and radioactive growth, growth and decay model. You should have that in your notes already from the equation week. So our initial starting value is always going to be our, in this case it's 325, right? It always comes first. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to multiply by however much we're going to have left. So we see that we're decaying at a rate of 13%. So we have 100% is what it would normally be, but we have minus 13%, right? So that's going to be 0.87. Okay, that's how much we're going to have left if there was 1 year. So raised to the power of t, right? T being how many years. So our answer there is going to be f of t. It's going to be a, f of t equals 325, 0.87, raised to the power of t. Because we're decaying at an annual rate of 13% and we're asked for how much is remaining, right? If we were asked for how much is lost, then we wouldn't be using this 0.87, right? If we're asked for how much is remaining, we use this 0.87. So we do that 100% minus that 13% we lose a year and raise it to the power of t. So our answer there is going to be A. And you should already have the equation for this model in your notes. So this one's really just understanding that equation. So 14 there will be A. All right, question 15. All right, this expression up here is equivalent to which of the following? All right, so how you're going to set this up is you're going to do x plus 3 there, and then in your division box then you're going to have that 5x minus 2. So you're going to do what times 5x minus 2, or I'm sorry, what times x plus 3 over here? What times x plus 3 gives me 5x plus 2? Well, the first thing we have to do is 5x. So we have 5 times x. Keep in mind this is going to be subtraction, so we have minus 5x, and then 5 times 3 gives me positive 15. Keep in mind that this negative gets distributed here and gets distributed here. So we're going to have 5x minus 5x, that's going to give me 0x. And then I'm going to have a negative 2 minus 15, which gives me negative 17. Therefore, this negative 17, right, that's going to be a remainder because we don't have another x term. So that negative 17 is our remainder. I see my only one of the remainder of negative 17 is here. I also see that I have to have this 5, right? This 5 doesn't get divided by anything. It's all on its own since it's not a remainder. So we're going to have 5 minus 17 over x plus 3. So with your remainder in these situations where you're dividing by something with a variable like this, your remainder gets set over your variable. So your remainder is 17 over x plus 3. And you have to keep in mind you have to have it over x plus 3 since that's what we were dividing by, right? So this one could be a good one to put in your notes, understanding how to divide with two variables like this, or not with two variables, with variable in the denominator and the numerator. That's how we set it up. So we take what's in our denominator, we put it out here. We take what's in our numerator, we put it in the box here. Then we find out what times whatever is was in our denominator gets us what's in our numerator, and then we subtract that, and then whatever is our remainder gets set over our over what we had in our denominator. So answer for 15 will be D. All right, so I see I have an equation with a square root set equal to 1 without. I see I only have one variable x as well. So if a equals 2, what is the solution set of the equation above? All right, one thing you should put in your notes is if you're ever asked for a solution and you see that you have a square root with a variable under it, you need to make sure that you're checking whatever solutions you get. So you have to check them by plugging them back into the original equation and seeing if they work. So you should put that in your notes, that you have to check those if there's a square root. In this case, there is, so you have to make sure you're checking them. All right, so let's go ahead and solve. So we can go ahead and plug in this 2 for a. So we have x minus 2 there. We're going to go ahead and square each side. So this x minus 4 squared means that we have to do x minus 4 times x minus 4. Right, so when we do that, we see we're going to have x squared, and then we're going to have minus 4x, and then we're also going to have another minus 4x, so we're going to have minus 8x. Then we're going to have minus 4 times minus 4, which will give us plus 16. All right, and then that's going to equal our x minus 2 because our squared cancels out our square root, so we just have over here x minus 2. So we're going to set this equal to 0, so we're going to add 2 to each side. Add 2 to each side. All right, we get positive 18 there, and then we're going to subtract x from each side. Subtract x, and we see that what we have left then is going to be x squared minus 9x, and then plus 18. So now we're going to factor this to find our solution. So I'm looking at what times what gives me 18, and then by doing that, right, I have this x here. I know I have to have an x here for this x squared because x times x gives me x squared. Next, I'm looking at factors of 18. For example, 2 and 9 and 6 and 3, and I'm looking for factors that will add to that negative 9 here. So I know that I have negative 6, and if I have negative 3, they're going to multiply to give me positive 18, but then we'll have that negative 6x and then a negative 3x, which will add to negative 9x. So those are going to be my factors I see there. All right, so then I know that those are my factors, so my solutions then are going to have to be x equals 6 and then x equals 3, because we would set that x minus 6 equal to 0, we'd add 6 to each side, and we would get x equals 6, and we'd do the same thing with x minus 3 and get that x equals 3. So those are our two possible answer choices. So now we have to plug them in to check which one works, right? They could both work, neither could work, or one could work. We don't know. We have to plug them in since we have this square root here. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's say that we have 6 for x. Well, we'd have 6 minus 2 square rooted. That's going to be the square root of 4, which is equal to 2. Now let's go ahead and plug in 6 over here. 6 minus 4 we see is also equal to 2. So they're equal to each other. So our answer choice of 6 will work. So we can get rid of B and C. Now we have to check answer choice 3. All right, well, if we plug 3 in, we'll have a 3 minus a 2, right? That's just 1. So the square root of 1 is going to be 1. But then we have 3 minus 4, which is equal to a negative 1. So those do not equal. They are not equal to each other. So 3 is incorrect, which means our correct answer for 9 is going to have to be D. So really the big thing you need to have in your notes here is understanding that we have to check our answer whenever we have a square root with a variable under it, right? So anytime we have a square root or a cubed root that could be as well, or a fourth root, anytime that we have a root with a variable under it, we need to make sure that we plug our answer back in and check it, because a lot of times one of the answers won't work. The other thing that we need to understand is how to factor, but you should probably have a decent understanding of that by now. All right, question 10. If t plus 5 divided by t minus 5 equals 10, what is the value of t? So right here, we just want to make sure that we get all our variables on one side. We see that we're going to do that by multiplying by t minus 5 to get rid of it there. Then we do our t minus 5 over here, right? We have 10 times t, that's going to give me 10t, and then 10 times negative 5 is going to be minus 50. So I'll have 10t minus 50, that's going to equal my t plus 5. I want to keep my my coefficient in front of t positive, so I'm going to subtract t from each side. That way I get 9t. And then I'll add 50 to each side. Right, so I have 5 plus 50, that's going to give me 55. So I have 55 is equal to 9t. I divide each side by 9, and I see that t then is going to equal 55 over 9, and I know that I'm only asked for the value of t. So my answer for 10 then is going to be answer choice D. As far as tips for this one, I talked about this before and I'll say it again. If we have only one variable, right, in our equation, and we have it in the denominator and in the numerator, then we want to multiply by that denominator so that way we can get it set equal to each other and then put all of our t's on one side to solve for it. So I talked about that before. That showed up again on this question here. That's really all of the things you could put in your notes for number 10. After that, it's just using algebra. All right, question 11. All right, so we've got two sets of equations. How many ordered pairs xy satisfy the system of equations shown above? All right, well, what I want to do is I want to get this top equation also set up in y equals 2 because that's going to be easier for me. So, and I would recommend putting that in your notes as well. If you're asked for where an ordered pair is as far as solving a system of equations, the best thing that you can do is you can have both your y's set equal to each other or both your x's set equal to each other. In this case, the best way to do it, in my opinion, is going to have both y's set together, because otherwise you have to go through and you have to multiply all of this and then figure out what x alone would equal, and that's going to take a lot longer. So the best thing you can do here is just to set it up y equals, right? So if we're going to do that, we already have one of our y equals. So for our other one, we just have to subtract 5 from each side, right? So I'll get rid of that real quick. So we have x minus 5, right? And then we have to divide by 2. So that's going to be x over 2 minus 5 over 2 equals y. All right, there. So now we have what both of our y's equal. All right, so how many ordered pairs satisfy the system of equations above? Keep in mind, we don't have to solve for the ordered pairs. We just have to know how many. Well, if we were to plot this, and sometimes plotting it is the best way to do it, we could go ahead and fill this out, right? We'd see that we'd have 2x squared. So we know that our graph opens up like this, right? It's going to be a parabola opening up like that. I see we have a minus 3 times a 9, so I'm going to have minus 27, which means that my vertex is going to be at negative 27, right? My lowest point is negative 27. And then I see that I'm going to have a minus 3x and a plus 18x because I have 9 times this 2x, that's going to be positive 18, and I have negative 3 times that x. So I'm going to have a positive 15x. Okay, so if I was to plot this, right, let's say that x was 0. Well, when x is 0, I'm going to be at negative 27, and we know that that is going to be we know that our graph opens up because we have 2x squared, right? So if we're opening up then, right, we open up, and we also know that that's going to be our minimum, right? We know it's our minimum because any x that we put in for, let's say we do a positive x, right? A positive x means that we're going to have 2x squared plus a 15 times a positive number, so we're going to go up that way. If we were to have a negative x, then I guess we would go down. So this isn't our minimum. Our minimum is going to be somewhere over here. But either way, it doesn't change the fact that we're going to open up in both directions, right? So we're going to open up in both directions eventually, right? It might look something more like this, right? But eventually it opens up in both directions because this x squared has a positive coefficient in front of it. So eventually it's going to open up in both directions. And we see our other equation, we have a y-intercept of negative 5 over 2, right? And we are increasing there. So if we were to simply plot it, we'd see that it looks something like that, right? So we see it's going to cross each other twice. Therefore, there's 2 ordered pairs that have solutions there. So one thing I'd recommend in situations like that where you're asked for how many ordered pairs are going to satisfy a system of equations, a lot of times solving it by graphing is going to be the easiest and the fastest way. There are times when you're going to have to hand write it and hand find the solutions because it'll be really close on a graph, right? It'll be something like this. You'll have a line going up, and you'll have something where it's going to be like that, right? And you have to figure out if it's really touching right here. So there's some situations where you're going to have to solve for it, but a lot of times if you just sketch a quick graph, you'll see it's something like this. And you'll see pretty quickly that there's obviously only 2 solutions there. So that's one thing I recommend is just kind of graphing it and seeing if you can solve that way, especially on the earlier questions because they're more likely to be easy and easier to solve like that. So if it's a question on about 1 through 20, I'd recommend using this strategy because questions 1 through 20 can usually be solved by a lot simpler methods since they're not as difficult as questions 20 through 30 are. And that I'm talking about the SAT with calculator section. On the no calculator section, questions usually about 1 through 11 are fairly easy, so that can also be used in that situation. But 12 through 15 could require you to solve it manually, or not using graph, but using setting equations equal to each other and things like that. All right, question 12. We've got Ken and Paul. Okay, so we have Ken and Paul each ordered a sandwich at a restaurant. The price of Ken's sandwich was X dollars, and the price of Paul's sandwich was $1 more than the price of Ken's sandwich. If Ken and Paul split the cost of the sandwiches evenly and each paid a 20% Tip, which of the following expressions represents the amount in dollars each of them paid? Okay, so notice how I filled out my equation as I read through the problem. That's one thing that I would recommend doing if you see a big long question like this, and it's going to be an inequality question. So if you saw any signs like this in your answer choices as you glanced at the problem, that's a sign that you should be writing things out as you read. Another sign is just if it's really long like this, I would just go ahead and start writing things along as you read, because otherwise if you have to read it twice, that's going to take you a lot longer. So if it's really long like this, I would recommend writing things out as you read. So if you saw what I did, I read that we have a sandwich that costs X dollars. I put that down. Then I saw that we have a sandwich that's $1 more than that. So I had 1 plus X then. So I'm basically doing my total cost as I read through. So the total cost can be X plus 1 plus X. And then I read that they're paying a 20% tip on top of that. So it's going to be 1.2 times that's going to be their total. And then I read that they're each splitting it, right? They split that cost evenly, so we have to divide by 2, okay? Why did I divide by 2? Because we're looking for the cost that each of them paid. Not that they paid together, but that each of them paid individually, which is going to be half that. Okay, so if I were to do that, what I'm going to see that I'm going to have is I'm going to have 1.2 times 2x plus 1 all over 2, right? So then when I do that, I'm going to see I have a 2.4x there, and then that's over 2, so that's 1.2x. And then a 1.2 times a 1, that's 1.2 over 2, which is plus 0.6. So my answer there is going to be C. All right, so things that you could put in your notes for that one is writing out your equation as you read through the problem. All right, question 13. So we've got two graphs. The functions f and g defined by f of x equals 8x squared minus 2 and g of x equals negative 8x squared plus 2 are graphed in the xy plane above. The graphs of f and g intersect at the points k0 and negative k0. What is the value of k? All right, so we got to solve where these are equal to each other. So what we can do then is we can just set them equal to each other. All right, we set them equal to each other. We've got 8x squared minus 2 is equal to negative 8x squared plus 2. We go ahead and add 8x squared to each side to keep our coefficient in front of x positive. So we add 8x squared. We see that we're going to have 16x squared, and then we have to add 2 to each side to set it equal to a number. 2 plus 2 gives me 4, so I have 16x squared equals 4. I'm going to divide each side by 16 then. Divide each side by 16. 4 over 16 I know is equal to 1/4, so now I have x squared equals 1/4. Now when I square root each side to solve for x, I know that x squared square rooted is just going to give me x, and then I know the square root of 1/4 is going to be plus or minus 1/2. Therefore, what I can do as far as what the value of k is, I know it has to be b 1/2. Right? Square root of 1/4, right? It's going to be positive 1/2. Positive 1 over 2. So our answer there has to be b as far as the value of k, right? And that's going to be negative and positive, so positive half and negative half. Either way, value of k is half, right? Because we have that negative there. So k will have to be b 1/2. All right, so as far as things to put in your notes, just setting those equations equal to each other is really what we had to do there. And then I already talked about keeping that coefficient in front of x positive, so that way it makes it easier to solve for the answer. All right, we've got question 14. If the expression above is rewritten in the form a plus bi, where a and b are real numbers, what's the value of a? Okay, so we only need this first term. We don't have to worry about that term. All right, so once again, I talked about this, I believe, yesterday. We talked about multiplying by the conjugate. So that conjugate's going to be 3 plus 2i, because we flip the sign here. 3 plus 2i. So let's solve for our denominator first, and that's what I recommend doing with these types of questions. With the complex conjugate is solving for your denominator first. All right, well, we're going to have 3 times 3. 3 times 3. That's going to give us 9. Our middle terms are going to cancel because we have minus 2i times 3 and then plus 2i times 3, so we don't have to worry about that. Then we're going to have minus 2i times positive 2i, and that's going to be minus 4i squared. We know I squared is negative 1, so we'd have minus 4 times negative 1. That becomes a plus 4, and then we're going to end then with 13 in our denominator. Okay, so as far as what's in our numerator, we don't have to worry about our I term, but we do have to worry about our I squared term. So we're going to have this negative I times 2i. That's going to give me negative 2i squared. So negative 2i squared. And then we're going to have a 3 times an 8, which will give me 24. So 24 minus 2i squared. We know I squared is negative 1, so we flip our sign there. 24 plus 2 gives us 26. So we have 26 over 13, which we know is equal to 2. So our answer there is going to be answer choice A. Right? We're only asked for the value of A, and that is going to be answer choice A, which is 2. All right, now we've got question 15. As far as notes to put in for 14, really just remembering that complex conjugate. I talked about that in our equations week where we went over math equations, so should be good there. And then the other thing I would just say is solving for your denominator first when doing the complex conjugate. I think that's helpful. All right, in the quadratic equation above, k and p are constants. What are the solutions for x? All right, big thing that I see immediately, and I would put this in your notes. If you see a setup that looks like the quadratic equation, right, that x equals negative b plus or minus root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. If you see something that looks like that as all your answer choices, then you're probably going to have to be using this quadratic formula here. All right, so if we were to do that, what we want to do is we want to first set this equal to 0. So we're going to subtract 2p from each side. All right, now when we do that, we're going to get x squared minus k over 2x minus 2p equals 0. Then what we're going to do is we have to get rid of this this divide by 2 here. So I'm going to multiply everything by 2, so that way I don't have to deal with any fractions. So I'm going to get 2x squared minus kx, and then I'll have minus 4p, because I multiplied everything by 2. All right, so now that I have that, I can go ahead and plug in my values in this quadratic equation. Now what I'm going to look for immediately is just what is the same in everything, because I'm not going to worry about that. I see I have k squared is the same in everything. Don't have to worry about that. One thing that jumps out to me is this going to be this k over 4 versus k over 2. I can get rid of half my answers just by figuring that out. So I see right away that I'm going to have over 2a. I see my a value is 2, so I'm going to have it be over 4. So negative b, I see that b is negative k. So I'm going to have negative k. That's going to be positive k over 4. That means I can get rid of c and d. Next thing I'm going to look at is this right here. This is the only other difference. That's all I really care about, is what that p value is going to be. So that's going to be this minus 4ac. So I have minus 4 times a. A is 2, so that gives me a minus 8. And now I multiply that by c. I see that c is negative 4p, so that's going to give me a positive 32p. Positive 32p. Okay, so I know my answer then has to be answer choice B for question 15. All right, so things you should put in your notes for that one, just understanding only do parts of the question that is going to help you get rid of wrong answer choices, right, or get you to the right answer choice. Don't waste time on this part or on this part after we've already gotten rid of C and D, because this is obviously the same in both answer choices. Really just working to get rid of those wrong answer choices, how we work through these the fastest. All right. All right, so the question 9, what I'm seeing immediately that jumps out to me is I see that I have a lot of variables. Okay, I don't have a ton of numbers, but I have a lot of variables. So one thing that I know immediately when I see that is I'm just going to look at what my answer choices are really quick, and I see that they're what h equals. See, everything here is what h equals. Then I read my last part, and it just says which of the following correctly expresses storage cost in terms of the other variables. So I know I just have to rearrange to solve for h here. So I don't have to read any of this. Okay, so I just saved time there. So that's something you should put in your notes, is that if you see an equation given with a lot of variables, skip down to your answer choices and see if you just have to find what one variable equals, because then you can just rearrange your equation. Okay, and then always double check it by reading this last part of the question just to make sure that you're just asked for that. And then once you've done that, just go ahead and rearrange. So now we know that we just have to solve for h. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to go ahead and square both sides to get rid of our square root. So we're going to have q squared equals 2dk over h. We're going to multiply each side by h, multiply each side by h, divide each side by q squared, divide each side by q squared, and we see that h then is going to equal 2dk over q squared. I look at my answer choices, I see the only one with q squared in the denominator is c, so I know my answer for 9 has to be answer choice C. So the big thing here was really just making sure that we recognized right away that we didn't have to read all of this, so we saved that time. We just saw that we have to solve for k. Then we just used algebra to go ahead and solve for h. I misspoke, solve for h, not solve for k. So that's the big tip you should have in your notes for number 9. Number 10, in the equation above, c is a constant. If the equation has infinitely many solutions, what's the value of c? All right, well, if we have infinitely many solutions, that means whatever is on this side has to equal whatever is on this side. So I need x to equal x then. Well, I have 8x, so if I want to get to x, I have to minus 7x. I have a 2x here, so I want to know 2 times what, right? 2x times what is going to give me 7. Well, 2x times 3.5 is going to give me 7, but I already have a 1 here, so I have to take that 3.5, and I have to subtract a 1. So 3.5 minus 1, that's going to leave me with 2.5, which is equal to 5 over 2. So my answer there is going to be answer choice B for number 10. So as far as things you should put in your notes for this one, if we have an equation that has infinitely many solutions, then that means that they're identical equations, right? So we have an x here. Well, x has to equal x then. So 8x minus 7x is going to leave us with x. Therefore, we know that this 2x times c plus 1 is going to have to give us 7. We know that 2x times 3.5 gives us 7, but we have a plus 1 here, so we want to subtract 1 from 3.5, and we get 2.5. So really the big thing there is understanding that infinitely many solutions means we have to have equivalent equations. All right, question 11. In 1962, the population of a bird species was 2,000. The population K years after 1962 was 48. The K and K satisfies the equation above. Which of the following is the best interpretation of the number 61 in this context? Well, I know this 2,000 here is my bird population in 2000 for that species, and I know I'm losing 61 then for every K, right? K being the years after 1962, right? So that means that for every year after 1962, I'm losing 61 birds per year. So 61 birds per year are dying. So that's going to be answer choice D for number 11. The answer, or the average decrease in the population per year from 1962 to K years after 1962 is that right there, right? That 61 is how many birds are dying off per population year from 1962 for every year after that. Okay, it's not the population K years after 1962 because that's whatever this 2000 minus 61K would equal. It's not the value of K when the population was 48. That's incorrect as well. See the difference between the population? No, we're not dealing with difference. Whenever we have a variable next to a number, we know that that number is really dealing with our slope here. In this case, that slope is going to be our decrease in population per year. So as far as tips you can put in your notes, anytime we have a number next to a variable in our equation and it's a subtraction like that, we're really looking at most likely a decrease in some sort of number, right? That's really our slope that we're dealing with there. All right, so right here we have the graph of the equations shown in the xy plane above where y equals f of x, which of the following functions could define f. Immediately when I see that I have all of these numbers and I see I have these zeros here, I'm going to go ahead and come up with what my zeros are and use those to find my answer. So I see that I have an x-intercept at 2, which means I have to have x minus 2. I see I have an x-intercept at negative 1, which means I have to have x plus 1 because I have to flip that sign. And then I have one at negative 3, which means I'll have to have x plus 3. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of anything that doesn't have all three of those. So I see A doesn't have all three of those, I'm going to get rid of that. I see B doesn't have all three of those, I'm going to get rid of that. Then I'm looking at my other answer choices. I see they have them. So the next thing that I'm going to do in order to know my right answer is I notice that I have increasing on my after 2, so basically increasing as I go to infinity with x, and I see I'm decreasing here. In order for that to happen, I have to have an odd power. Okay, so I have to have x raised to an odd power as my first term. So if I look at that, I see that answer choice D, I'm going to have an even power because I'm going to have a 2 times a 1 times a 1 power. So that's going to give me some x to the 4th power as my leading term, which means that it would look something like this, right? That's going up and up, or down and down. Okay, or down and down. So that can't be my answer. I need something that has an odd exponent, which is going to be answer choice C, because I have a 2 times a 2, and then I have this plus a 1 here, so it's going to give me some x raised to the 5th, right? So my answer there is going to have to be answer choice C. As far as things to put in your notes, understanding anything with an odd exponent is going to have one thing that goes up and one thing that goes down, so something like that, or something like this, right? You're looking at things with odd exponents, you're not going to have them both going up in the same direction. If you have an even exponent for your first term, then it's going to look something like that, where it's going up in both directions or going down in both directions. So that's another thing that we can use. Another thing was using those x-intercepts to solve. That's another thing I talked about before, and that I would put in your notes if you don't have it there yet as well. All right, question 13. Which of the following could be the x-coordinate of a solution to the system of equations above? Okay, what jumps out to me immediately here? I'm asked to solve for an x-coordinate, and I see I have a y. I know what y equals, and I can place that in here, and then I can just solve for x by finding what it equals, because I have a constant here. So then I'm only dealing with one variable, and the variable I'm dealing with is what I have to solve for anyways, so that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this in for this y here. So my x plus 2 squared, that's going to give me x squared plus 4x plus 4, right? Because this 2 would get multiplied by that x. This x would get multiplied by our other 2 to give us plus 4x. And then we're going to have a 2 times itself because x plus 2 squared can be rewritten as this, right? X plus 2. That's going to get us our plus 4. So that's our first part. Next thing we're going to have is a negative 2x plus 4 minus 3. Well, plus 4 and then minus 3, that's going to give me a plus 1. That's all that's going to be left, because that's 4 minus 3. So then I'm going to have a negative 2x, and then I'm going to have plus 1, and that's going to get squared. So negative 2x times negative 2x is going to give me a positive 4x squared. So I'm going to have plus 4x squared here. Now I have a negative 2x times 1, and then I'll have another negative 2x times 1, so that's going to give me minus 4x. Okay, so I know that's going to cancel with this 4x, so now I have no x term. And then I'll have a plus 1 times a plus 1, which will just give me a plus 1, and I'm just going to add that right here to give me that 5. So I see what I'll be left with is an x squared plus a 4x squared. That'll give me 5x squared, so I have 5x squared plus 5. That's going to equal 40. At this point, I go ahead and I subtract 5 from each side. Subtract 5 from each side. I'm going to have 35 equals 5x squared, so 5x squared equals 35. Divide each side by 5 to isolate x squared. 35 over 5 is 7. I square root each side now to get rid of this squared here. When I do that, I see I have the square root of 7 as my answer, which is going to be answer choice A. So big things that we're looking at here is just understanding that if we're asked to solve for a variable and we're given what one of them equals and we can plug it in, right, in order to get rid of our y and only have left that variable we have to solve for, that's going to be our quickest way to get to the right answer. So that's what I'm recommending right there. So you can put that in your notebook. I would recommend it. All right, question 14. The equation above can be used to model the population in thousands of a certain city t years after 2000. According to the model, the population is predicted to increase by 0.5% every n months. What is the value of n? Okay, well, n months, I know t is in years, so t is in years. So I know that if we're going to take a 0.5% increase, okay, a 0.5% is 0.005, okay, so a 0.5% increase is 0.005. So I need that raised to the first power. If I'm going to have that raised to the first power, I need t to equal 3. So I would need 3 years, which I know that 3 years is equal to 36 months, right? 3 years equals 36 months. Because there are 12 months in a year, times 3 years gives us 36 months. So my answer there has to be D. So the big thing that I'd recommend as far as this is understanding how these equations work. I talked about this in our first week of prep. Understanding that if we have a 0.5% increase, then we're dealing with this right here. And this is correct as far as a 0.5% increase. But in order for that to be true, we need to raise it to the first power, right? So the power of 1, so we have to have a 3 over 3 there. And then understanding that t is in years, so if we have 3 years, we just convert that 3 years to months, and we see we're going to have 36 months. All right, question 15. Which of the following is an equivalent form of the expression 2x minus 2 squared minus 2x minus 2? All right, first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what I can use to get rid of wrong answer choices as quickly as I can. I see I have different numbers here, here, and possibly here and here as well for my last term. So I'm going to solve for what my last term equals first. So I'm going to have a negative 2 times a negative 2. Since this is squared, that's going to give me positive 4. Then I have a minus a negative 2. Minus negative 2, it gives me plus 2. So I know my last term is going to have to be a 6, so I can get rid of b. And then I look down here, I see I'll have a minus 2 times a minus 2, which is a plus 4 for my last term. I can get rid of c as well. And I have a minus 3 times a minus 2, which gives me plus 6. So now I'm between a and d. Next thing I'm going to look at is what's different between them. Easiest thing that I see is a 2x squared here versus a 4x squared here, because that 2x gets multiplied by 2x, give me 4x squared. So now I'm going to go up here and come up with what my x squared term is going to be. Well, I'm going to have a 2x, and then that's going to get multiplied by 2x since this is squared. And that's going to give me 4x squared, so I know my answer then has to be D for 15. All right, so notice how I never worked with this middle term. I never worked with the middle term because it was quicker for me to get rid of wrong answer choices and then not even have to worry about that, because I didn't need to know the middle term to get to the right answer. I just had to know my last term and my first term. So understanding that you don't have to always solve for everything in the problem, and understanding you only have to solve for what's wrong with other answer choices, and then you can know the correct answer choice has to be correct, right? So that's something that I talk about a lot and that I would recommend putting in your notes or just adopting as a strategy as a whole. That's not even necessarily something that has to be in your notes, but it should be a strategy that you use to move faster. So we're going to work with the math no calculator section first, problems 9 through 15. For a ride, a taxi driver charges an initial fare of $3 plus 40 cents for every 1/5 of a mile driven. If the total charge for a ride is $27, what is the distance traveled in miles? All right, well, if we're charging 40 cents for every 1/5 of a mile driven, well, if we wanted to convert that to how many miles we're going to have, then we're going to need to multiply 0.4 by 5 and then multiply this by 5 as well. and that's going to give us that 1 mile, that 5 over 5. Each mile is going to cost that 5 times that 40 cents. So we see that that's going to give us a $2, right? So we're going to have 27 minus 3 is going to give us 24. And then we have 24 has to equal our $2 per mile. We divide each side by 2, divide each side by 2, and we see that our number of miles then is going to equal 12. So our answer there is going to be C. All right, so as far as tips you should put in your notes for this, notice how as I read through the question, since I kind of realized pretty early on that it was going to be a question involving an equation, I started writing out my equation as I read through the word problem. If you have a long word problem that's 4 lines or longer, I recommend that as you read through and see an equation that you start writing it down on your own. Try to do it without pausing to stop though. Try to keep reading and just write it down as you read through, so try to keep your eyes on the words. That's what I would recommend doing. If you want to put that strategy in your notes, you can. I think that's usually helps you save time, which I think is crucial for the SAT. All right, question 10. So we've got an equation up there. All right, so one thing that I'm going to check anytime I have a lot of variables, right, and not a lot of numbers, what I'm always going to check is what my, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check A through D, because sometimes it'll be one variable equals something, right, and the answer choice is A through D. Then I know I just have to go through and solve for that variable. So that's one strategy I use that you could put in your notes. If I don't see that, which I don't in this one, then what I'm going to check is I'm going to check my last part, okay, my last sentence with this question mark. So I see, according to the Torricelli's law, which of the following is equivalent to the velocity v. Okay, so this means that I just need to go through and solve for what v is equal to. So to do that, I'm going to multiply by 2 to get rid of that. Okay, I'm multiplied by 2 over here. I'm going to divide by m. Because I'm solving for v, I divide by m. That's going to cancel right there. So I have 2gh equals v squared. I'm going to go ahead and square root v squared, and I'll square root this side as well. So I'll end with square root of 2gh equals v. Okay, so I know my answer there is going to be C. Okay, so notice how I didn't have to go through and read any of this right here. Okay, if you notice in your problem that you're given up here, or your equation, that there's a lot of variables, then oftentimes what you have to do is just solve for what one is equivalent to. So I always check my answer choices first to see if it's all what one variable equals, because that's pretty much a dead tell to me. And then the other thing I'm going to check is what our ending question is here. And oftentimes I'll realize that I don't have to actually read this part, I just have to rearrange my equation, which in this case I had to rearrange it to solve for what v equals. So my answer for 10 there is going to be C. So I would put that strategy in my notes if I were you. All right, question 11. I've got a right triangle above. I've got x equals 60, so I'll go and put that here. Okay, I also know that I have a 90-degree angle here, which means I'm going to have a 30 here because my angles add to 180. So what is the length of side AB? So I'm going to solve for this. I'll call it y. Call that y. All right, well, I see I have a 60, 30, 90 triangle. So now if you paid attention during our equations week, where we took a first week and just went through the equations from the math section, we know with a 60, 30 triangle like this, that are across from our 30, we could call that an x, right? And then across from our 60, we would have x times root 3. And then across from our hypotenuse then is going to be that 2x, right? And I'm just going to quick run back. I think that you're given that equation as well. I'll just quick check. Either way, you're going to want to have it memorized, but I'll just quick check if you're given it as well, right? You see that it is right here, your special right triangles. So you're given that equation, but you really should have it memorized because it'll help you to save time. All right, so let's get back down here. We've got question 11. All right, well, if I know that my x is equal to 4, then I know my 2x is going to have to equal 2 times that 4, so that's going to have to equal 8. So that's going to tell me then the length of side AB has to be 8. So notice how easy that was once we understood that 60-30 triangle rule, okay, that 60-30-90 triangle rule, that this is x times the cubed root of 3, and then, or I'm sorry, times square root of 3, and then this right here is going to be 2 times x. We saw x was 4, 2 times 4 gives us 8. Okay, so understanding that 60-30-90 triangle rule there is very important. All right, so our answer for 11 there is going to be B. All right, question 12. Which of the following values is a solution to the equation above? All right, so one thing that I see immediately is that I have what looks to be, I'm going to have to use my quadratic formula, right? Because I see that I have a number and a square root, and I have a number plus that over a number. So that's kind of telling me that I'm going to have to use my quadratic equation. Okay, so my quadratic equation is going to be negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That's my quadratic equation. All right, the other thing that I'm going to see is I just see that this doesn't factor, right? If you were to try to factor this, it won't work. So I know I'm going to have to use my quadratic equation to factor. So I'm going to have negative b. I know my b is 6. So I'm going to have negative 6 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So that's going to be 6 squared minus 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is 1. And that's going to be all over 2 times a. I know that that's 2 times 4. All right, so now I just go through and I simplify. So negative 6 over 8, because 2 times 4 is 8. That's going to give me negative 3 over 4. Okay. And then I'm going to have this root 6 squared, so plus or minus root 6 squared. In this case, I see it has to be plus because all my answer choices have plus. So I'll just go ahead and do that here. It's going to be plus this 6 squared is 36. 36 minus 4 times 4, that's going to be 36 minus 16, so that's going to give me root 20. And that root 20 here, I'll go ahead and get rid of that. That's all over that 2 times 4, which is 8. So now what we're going to do is we're going to factor out this root 20 because we see none of our answer choices have a root 20 in it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to make a factor tree. We have a 2 times a 10. That gives us 20. A 2 times a 5 gives us 10. I see I can take my 2's out, and I could rewrite that as 2 times root 5. Okay, so 2 times root 5 is going to equal root 20. So I'm going to replace my root 20 here with 2 root 5. So I'll have plus 2 root 5. Well, now I see I can cancel this 2, make it a 1, cancel the 2 out of the 8, and make it a 4. Okay, so now I can just connect this here, take away my 1, because 1 times root 5 is the same as root 5, and I have negative 3 plus root 5 over 4. So my answer is going to be A for right there. So that right there is question 12, and we see our answer choice has to be A. So as far as things that you should have in your notes for this one, recognizing with answer choices that if we see that we have a number and then we have square roots right here, right, and we have a plus or a minus, especially if you see a plus or minus, so if this had a minus right there, so it's plus or minus there, or plus or minus here, then that's an indicator we're going to be using this quadratic formula here, okay? So that's really an indicator there. In this case, I still, even if it's a plus sign and no minus sign under it, I still see that it's going to be an indicator I'm going to use this quadratic formula because I've got these roots, right? Normally, if it's factorable, we're not going to be dealing with roots like this, okay? And it won't be set up in this way. So that was a dead indicator to me that I had to use that quadratic formula. So I would put that in your notes. The next thing you should have in your notes is how to use a factor tree to simplify square roots like this. So the square root of 20, I made a factor tree, right? 2 times 10 gave me 20, so I have a 2 here. 2 times 5 gave me 10. Since I have 2 2's here, and this is the square root, I can take them out and just have 2 times what's remaining here in this 5. Okay, so 2 root 5. So understanding factor trees is also important. All right, question 13. I've got C of t is equal to 50.25 t plus 228.75. So I've got the average cost per square foot in dollars of a condominium in city X can be modeled by the function C defined above, where t is the number of years after 2001 and t is between 0 and 8. In the function, what does the number 50.25 represent? Well, I see that that's right next to my t. Okay, so this is going to be dealing with my slope. Okay, since it's positive, I know I have an increasing cost. Okay, because as time increases, my cost will increase. And I know that it's not going to be, it won't be A, because A says the average cost per square foot in dollars of a condominium in 2001. No, it's not the average cost because we have to add in this 228, so we can get rid of A. B, the average cost per square foot in dollars of a condominium in 2009. No, we would have to plug in the 8 with the T there. Okay, so that 50.25 would have to get multiplied by that 8 since it's 8 years after 2001, and then we'd have to add 228 to get that. So B is incorrect. C, the approximate increase in years for each dollar. Increase in the average cost per square foot. No, it's not the approximate increase in years for each dollar increase. It is D, the approximate increase in the average cost per square foot in dollars of a condominium for each year after 2009. Because as T increases by 1, our cost will increase by 50.25. All right, so as far as things that you can put in your notes for this one, really understand this right here, okay? This is really important to understand. When we're given an equation like this and we have a number or a coefficient with a variable, that is going to be our slope. Okay, understanding that will be our slope, and this over here will be our y-intercept. So our y-int or y-intercept. So really just understanding that and being able to apply that to the context of word problems like this, that can be really important. So being able to apply that slope and y-intercept to the context of word problems, and you'll get better at that with practice as you go on, but make sure that you really focus in on that with word problems. Focus on describing what they mean in the context of the problem. All right, question 14. What is the sum of the complex numbers 6 plus 5i plus 3 times I squared? Okay, one thing you need to know is that I squared equals -1. If you don't know that, put it in your notes. Since we know I squared equals -1, we can get rid of this and then multiply by -1, which means we'll have a -3. Okay, so we have plus 8 minus 3. That's just going to be 8 minus 3. It's going to become plus 5, okay, because we're asked for the sum of these numbers. So now we have 6 plus this 5, that gives us 11. And then we have to add this 5i here, add that 5i, and we see we're left with 11 plus 5, which is going to be, or I'm sorry, 11 plus 5i, which will be answer choice A. So as far as things you should put in your notes, this I squared equaling -1 is important to understand. Other than that, we were really just adding terms, okay? So understanding I squared equals -1. That's really the big thing with 14. 14 isn't really a word problem, so there's not a whole lot we have for tips there. All right, so which of the following could be the graph of y equals x squared plus 2x plus 2? All right, one thing I see immediately, the first thing I'm going to do when I see an equation like this, I'm asked to find the graph, the first thing that I'm thinking is factor it, okay? Now here I see I can't factor because I have a 2 here and a plus 2 here. If I was going to try and factor that, there's no factors of 2 that are going to add to be positive 2, okay? We could think about x times -2 and then times an x times -1, but then we're going to have -3x, so that's not going to give us positive. We could think about an x plus 2x times an x plus 1, but then we have plus 3x, okay? So we see that that doesn't work as far as factoring. Okay, so we can't factor it, so I can't use that to find my zeros. And the other thing that indicates to me that I'm not going to be able to factor is the fact that these aren't labeled, right? We don't have numbers here. That's an indicator to me that this isn't going to be factorable, okay? Because otherwise, I could factor it and then plot where my 3 is, right? Because I know that has to be a 0. But the fact that my x-axis on my graph has no coordinates, that's telling me that factoring is probably not the way to go. Now, if it had coordinates, I'd immediately look to factor this. But in this case, it doesn't have coordinates. So I'm actually not going to look to immediately factor this. But I wanted to show you that just for other problems because a lot of times they will have coordinates and factoring is going to be your best option. But if you see that there are no coordinates, then don't necessarily waste time factoring. See if you can solve it another way. So one thing I see immediately is I see my my y-intercept is going to be positive 2. So I'm going to check and make sure they all have a y-intercept of positive 2. I see that they do. So I can't get rid of anything based on that. But the other thing that I see is that when I go to the right from 2, right? So as I increase x going to the right from 2, this will go up. This plus 2x means I'm going to add 2 times the number that's positive, so that's going to go up, and this 2 will be constant. So I'm going to have to go up, right, as I go to the right from 2. So that means A and B are possible answer choices, but C and D are not because they go down from as we go to the right of 2, or of 0, right, 2 being our y-intercept here. Okay, so I know C and D can't be correct. Okay, so now the other big difference that I'm looking at is will we ever be negative? Okay, so will we ever cross into negative territory? So here's what I'm going to do to determine that. I see I have a plus 2 here. I see I only have a plus 2x here, right? And if I'm going to go negative, right, eventually this x squared, a negative number squared, will be the same as the positive number squared. So that squaring is going to be worth more than whatever this 2 times the negative number is going to be worth. So I'm really just looking at a couple points here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in -1. And what I'm going to see is I'll see if I was going to use -1 as x, I'll have minus 2x, right? Minus 2 times 1, which is just minus 2. That's going to be countered by my plus 2, and then I'll have a plus 1 from -1 squared. So that's just going to give me 1, right? And then if I was going to look and move on to a -2, well, -2 times 2 is going to give me -4. -4 plus 2 is going to give me a -2. And then I have to take that -2, and I have to add -2 squared to it, which is positive 4, and I see I'm going to get positive 2. Okay, and then I'm going to get positive 2. Okay, so that's what that answer right there would be, positive 2. So now I see I'm just back here. Okay, so there's really no way I'm ever going to cross below 0. So I know A has to be incorrect, and I know B has to be my correct answer for 15. Okay, so when you can't factor, which an indicator you can't factor is that there's not going to be coordinates here. Okay, so that's going to tell you you're probably not going to be able to factor. First thing that I'm going to do is look at the y-intercept, see if I can use that to get rid of some answer choices. Next thing I'm going to look to do, is it opening up like this? Or is it opening down like this? In this case, they all opened up, so I couldn't do anything with that. Third thing that I was going to do is I was going to look from my y-intercept, as I go right, am I going up or down? Okay, that was able to get rid of 2 of my answer choices. So as x goes to the right, what does y do? So what does y do there? So that helped me get rid of C and D. The next thing that I did is I looked at my zeros, right? So zeros meaning my x-intercepts. So in this case, I wasn't looking at my x-intercepts with coordinates. I was just looking to see if we crossed the x-axis, okay? So in this case, it was just an x-axis, okay, x-axis. So do we ever cross it? All right. So that takes us through our tips for question 15. Now we're going to go ahead and switch. Question 9. If xy is a solution of the system of equations above and x is greater than 0, which just means x is positive, what is the value of x times y, right? So we want to make sure we pay attention to our end question here. We're not asked for x or y or their coordinates. We're asked for x times y. So we'll first find the coordinates, then we have to remember to multiply them. All right, so we're given that y equals x squared, so we can go ahead and plug that in to our equation for y. So we're going to have 2x squared plus 6 equals 2 times x plus 3. Well, 2 times x gives us 2x, and then 2 times plus 3 gives us plus 6. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to get all our x's on one side of our equation. So we're going to go ahead and subtract 6 from each side. And the 6's will cancel on each side. So now we're going to have to subtract 2x from each side, so we can get all of our x's on one side. So we have 2x squared minus 2x equals 0. Well, now I'm looking here, and I see I can factor out 2x, right? So I'll be left with, because we have negative 2x and 2x squared, which each have 2x, so I can have 2x times x, right? Or 2x times x minus 1. All right, now all I got to do is set that equal to 0, right? So now I have x minus 1 equals 0, and we know that x minus 1 equals 0. We add 1 to each side, and we get that x equals 1. Okay, well now if we know that x equals 1, we can go ahead and we can plug 1 into our equation up top. So we have y equals x squared. We know our x is 1. 1 squared is 1, so we know y equals 1. We know x equals 1. We're asked for x times y. 1 times 1 equals 1. So our answer is A. Question 10. If a squared plus b squared equals z and a times b equals y, which of the following is equivalent to 4z plus 8y? Well, we're given our z in this equation, and we're given what our y equals in this equation. So we're going to go ahead and plug those equations in so we can find which equation of our answer choices is equivalent. So we have 4 times z, and we're told that z is a squared plus b squared. And then we have that plus 8 times y, and we're told that y is ab, so we have plus 8b, 8 plus 8ab. Now we multiply our 4 by our a squared, and we multiply our 4 by our b squared. We're left with 4a squared plus 4b squared plus 8ab. We can go ahead and rewrite that as 4a squared plus 8ab plus 4b squared. And what we see from doing that is we see that we have a pattern here, right? We have an a plus b squared pattern, right? If we write that out, a plus b squared is going to give us a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, right? So when we see our equation right here, now we're looking for the pattern it fits in, right? So 4a squared, well, if we have 4 as our coefficient next to our a squared, and we know that our 4 is getting squared, well, then we know we need to do the square root of 4 to find our a, right? We know square root of 4 is 2, right? And if we were to square root our a squared, because we know that that gets squared according to this equation, right? We would get a, right? So we'd have 2a. Now, if we go to our last term, we see that we have 4, right? So we're going to have square root of 4, so plus 2. And if we were to square root b as well, we'd have plus 2b. And if we look at our middle term, we have plus 8ab. Well, what's our a value? Our a value is 2. What's our b value? Our b value is also 2. And then 2 times 2 times our 2 here gets us 8. And we have our 2a and 2b, right? So those are ab. So 2a times 2b is going to get us 4b. 4b times our 2 in our equation over here gets us our 8ab. So we can go ahead and see that this equation here will be our solution. So now we just find which equation matches it, and the only equation that matches our equation is b. So b will be our correct answer. Question 11. The volume of right circular cylinder A is 22 cubic centimeters. What is the volume in cubic centimeters of a right circular cylinder with twice the radius and half the height of cylinder A? Well, we know our 22 cubic centimeter volume of right circular cylinder A is equal to pi times r squared times our height, because that is the equation for volume of a right circular cylinder. So we're going to use the factor of change method to find out how many times bigger or smaller our new right circular cylinder is than our old one, right? So what we're going to do is for every variable that stays the same, we put in a 1. So our pi will stay the same, so we put in a 1. Our radius squared, well, our radius is now twice our former radius, so it's going to be 2 squared. And then we're going to have that times our height, which it says is half the height of cylinder A. So we're going to have that times h, which stays the same, so we call h1 over our 2 because it's half the height. So now we go ahead and we solve for this, and this will tell us how many times bigger or how many times smaller the new right circular cylinder is in volume. So 1 times 2 squared, we know 2 squared is 4, and then 4 times 1/2 leaves us with 4 over 2. So we're going to have 2 times bigger, right? So we're going to be 2 times bigger than our 22 centimeter cubed volume. So we're going to go 2 times 22 cubic centimeters, which will give us 44 cubic centimeters. So our answer will be C. Question 12. Which of the following is equivalent to 9 to the power of 3/4? Well, we know 9 equals 3 squared. So now we're going to have 3 squared times 3 over 4 in our exponent, right? So to solve this, what you're going to do is you're going to do 3, and then for your exponents, you're going to have 2 over 1 times 3 over 4, and then you just solve that like you would normally with fractions, right? So you're going to be left with 3 to the power of 2 times 3, which is 6, over 4 times 1, which is 4, so 3 to the power of 6 divided by 4, which can be simplified down to 3 to the power of 3 over 2. Now when you have a base to the power of a fraction, your denominator is going to be what root you are, right? So in this case, our denominator is 2, so we're going to have the square root of 3 to the power of 3, because your numerator is what goes in our root box, right? So you're going to have the second root of 3 squared. Well, we know that with the second root of 3 to the power of 3. Well, we know that 3 to the power of 3 can be rewritten as 3 times 3 times 3. We take out 2 because that's what our root is, right? Our root's 2. So any groups of 2 we can take out. So we can go ahead and take out a 3, and we'll have 3 root 3 because we still have this 3 left. So we'll be left with 3 root 3, and that will be our answer, which is D. Question 13. At a restaurant, n cups of tea are made by adding tea bags to hot water. If t equals n plus 2, how many additional tea bags are needed to make each additional cup of coffee? Well, if we need one more cup of coffee, which is represented by n, we will have to increase t by 1, right? Because 2, this 2, we can think about this as our y-intercept, right? If our y-intercept's 2, we just have y equals x, right? So one more t, if we wanted one more bag of, or one more cup of tea, we need one more bag, right? Because it's just y equals x is how we can view it. So we know our answer will be B1. Question 14. The function f is defined by the equation above. Which of the following is the graph of y equals negative f of x in the xy plane? Well, we know y equals negative f of x. We're told f of x is equal to 2 to the power of x plus 1. So we'll have negative 2 to the power of x plus 1. We distribute this negative 1 here, and we get negative 1 times 2 to the power of x. That will be negative 2 to the power of x, and negative 1 times 1 just gets us negative 1. So we have y equals negative 2 to the power of x minus 1. Now we just find which equation, or which graph shows our equation, right? Well, if we know we have negative 2 to the power of x, any number to the power of x, so say 2 to the power of x, if x is negative, so on the left side of our y-axis, If x is negative, that just means 1 over 2 to whatever the absolute value of x is, right? So we know that this right here, this 2 to the x, can't ever change signs, right? So 2 to the x, it will always be positive, right? It can't go negative, but we know that it is, in this case, multiplied by -1. So it will always be negative, right? It will never switch. So we'll always have this value, our -2x, being negative, and then we always have that -1, right, as shown above right here. So we know our answer will always be negative. So any answer that goes positive can go ahead and be eliminated. And now we are just left with C. Question 15. Alan drives an average of 100 miles each week. His car can travel an average of 25 miles per gallon of gasoline. Alan would like to reduce his weekly expenditure on gasoline by $5. Assuming gasoline costs $4 per gallon, which equation can Alan use to determine how many fewer miles he should drive each week? Well, he wants to save $5. In order to save $5, how much fewer miles does he have to drive? Well, his car gets 25 miles to the gallon. So if he drives, we'll say M's 25, right? If he drives 25 miles less, then he's going to save $4, right? Which means that this will get multiplied by $4, because 25 over 25 will be 1. 1 times 4, he's going to save $4 if he decreases his amount of miles driven by 25, right? So we're left with 4m over 25 equals 5. So 5 equals 4m over 25. We find which equation matches ours. We see that equation D matches ours. So our answer is D. Question 9. If the square root of x plus the square root of 9 equals the square root of 64, what is the value of x? Alright, well right off the bat I can see square root of 64. I know the square root of 64 will be 8. And I also see square root of 9, which I know will be 3. So I can rewrite this equation as the square root of x plus 3 equals 8. Now I can subtract 3 from each side to isolate my root x. 8 minus 3 gives me 5, so I have 5 equals the square root of x. I'll go ahead and square each side, and I will get 5 squared, which is 25, equals x. And I'm asked for the value of x. We always want to double check what we're asked to answer with. So my answer will be C. Question 10. Jamie is preparing for a bicycle race. His goal is to bicycle an average of at least 280 miles per week for 4 weeks. He bicycled 240 miles the first week, 310 miles the second week, and 320 miles the third week. Which inequality can be used to represent the number of miles x Jamie could bicycle on the 4th week to meet his goal? Well, we know that our average per week is going to be our 240 we did the first week, plus our 310 we did the second week, plus our 340 we did the third week, or 320, plus our 320, and then plus our x, right, divided by 4. That'll give us our average per week. And we know that he wants to have that average be at least 280, right? So we want our average greater than 280. So now we got to find which equation matches that in our answer choices. So we look at equation A, and it's not even close. It has x alone, and it doesn't have it divided by it to get the average. So we can eliminate A. We see B. B has x on the wrong side, so we can get rid of that. C, it doesn't divide x by 4, so we can get rid of that. We look at equation D, and we don't see immediately that it's over 4, but if we look on the right side, we see that it has 4 times 280, and if we divide by 4 to each side, we get our equation that we wrote. So now we can go ahead and circle D as our answer. Question 12. Which of the following is equivalent to 4x squared plus 6x divided by the quantity 4x plus 2? Well, what we got to do here is we can go ahead and set up our long division. So we'll have 4x plus 2 out of our box, and we'll have 4x squared plus 6x in our box. So now we're going to look for 4x times what number gives us 4x squared. Well, 4x times x gives us 4x squared, so minus 4x squared. We have to also do our x times our 2, so we get plus 2x. Now we subtract. So 4x squared minus 4x squared gives us 0. 6x minus 2x gives us 4x. Okay, and now we go ahead and we find which or 4x times what number gives us 4x? Well, 4x times 1 gives us 4x, so we can go ahead and do that. So we'll have minus 1 times 4x, which would be 4x, and then 1 times 2, which is 2. Now we go ahead and we subtract. So we have 4x minus 4x gets us 0, and then we have minus 2 as our remainder. Right, so minus 2 is going to be our remainder, which means that it'll be over our 4x plus 2 still, because it's our remainder. And we know that we have x plus 1 that is completely out with no remainder. So we'll have x plus 1 minus 2 over 4x plus 2, which will be D. Looks like we skipped question 11, so we'll go back to that now. The vertex of the parabola in the xy plane above is 0, C. Which of the following is true about the parabola? Man, I can't say that today. Which of the following is true about the parabola with the equation y equals negative a x minus b squared plus c? Alright, well, if we look at our equation, we're asked for what's true of the parabola with this equation, right? Well, we see it has negative a, right? And we see we have x minus b squared next to it. So we know when we do that, we're going to end with negative a x squared. Well, what does this negative mean? It means that if we were to graph it, wherever our vertex is, we'll say it's right here, we're going to open down, right? Because we have that negative a. So we know that we're going to open down. So we can go ahead and get rid of all the answer choices that say open upward, like A and C. We can go ahead and get rid of. Okay, now the only part left is the beginning of B and D. We see that they each have C as their y coordinate for the vertex, so we need to determine if the x coordinate of our vertex is B or negative B. So our quadratic equation is A times x minus h squared plus k, where our vertex is hk. So if we look at the equation we're given, we see that B is h. So we know that B then will equal our x coordinate for our vertex. So if we know that B is our x coordinate for our vertex, then we know that B will be our answer, and D is out because it has negative B, which is not correct. Question 12, or we already did 12. Question 13. In the equation above, t is a constant. If the equation has no real solutions, which of the following could be the value of t? Alright, so in order to find out what t has to be in order to have no real solutions, what we're going to do is we're going to move t to our left side so that we can set our equation equal to 0. And then we're going to use b squared minus 4ac, which is our discriminant, to find out what value of t gives us no real solutions of all of our options here. So if b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, then there are no real solutions. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our equation that we've written, we're going to plug in our b. Our b is going to be negative 4. So we're going to have negative 4 squared. We know negative 4 squared is 16. And then we're going to have minus 4 times our a, which is 2, times our c, which is negative t. So times negative t. So now what we can see is we have 16, and then negative 4 times 2 will get us negative 8. And then negative 8 times negative t, negative 8 times negative t will get us plus 8t. Now we need that to be less than 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to subtract 16 from each side. So we have negative 16 must be greater than 8t. We're going to divide each side by 8. And we get that t must be less than negative 16 over 8. We know negative 16 over 8 is negative 2. So t must be less than negative 2. What is our only answer choice where t is less than negative 2? Our only answer choice where t is less than negative 2 is A. So A will be our answer. Question 14. A laundry service is buying detergent and fabric softener from its supplier. The supplier will deliver no more than 300 pounds in a shipment. Each container of detergent weighs 7.35 pounds. So we have 7.35 pounds per detergent, and each container of fabric softener weighs 6.2 pounds. So plus 6.2, we'll use F for fabric softener. Now we see that that can't be more than 300 pounds, so it has to be less than, and it says no more, so it can equal it, but it can't be any more than that, 300. Alright, the service wants to buy at least twice as many containers of detergent as containers of fabric softener. So we want 2 times the amount of fabric we saw, 2 times the amount of fabric softener we have to be less than or equal to the amount of detergent we have. Let D represent the number of containers of detergent and S represent the number of containers of fabric, right? So we'll go ahead and get rid of this F because it tells us to use S. And now we can go ahead and we have our system of equations. We're going to finish reading our question, but it's probably just going to ask us for these because I kind of glanced over at the answers, which it's okay to do as long as you're not spending too much time looking at the answers before reading the question. And it says, let D represent the number of containers of detergent and S represent the number of containers of fabric softener, where D and S are non-negative integers. Which of the following systems of inequalities represents the situation? Alright, well we know that we have to have less than 300 pounds, so it's going to be 7.35D plus 6.25, or plus 6.2S must be less than 300, which all answer choices have, so we can't eliminate anything on that. But then we have that 2 times S, so 2 times our fabric softener, must be equal to or less than the amount of detergent we have. So D must be greater than or equal to 2S, which is A. Question 15. Which of the following is equivalent to A plus B over 2 squared? Well, what we have to do here is we have to go ahead and do A plus B over 2, and then we have to use FOIL, or the box method, whatever you prefer. We'll just use FOIL here. So we're going to go A times A. A times A is going to give us A squared, and then A times B over 2 gives us AB over 2, and then we do B over 2 times A, which will give us plus AB over 2 again, and then we'll do B over 2 times B over 2. B over 2 times B over 2 is just B over 2 squared, which means we'll get B squared over 2 squared. 2 squared is 4, so B squared over 4. Another way you can do this is if you know the pattern for A plus B squared, and I'm using A plus B squared not in connection with this equation, but just as an example. I mean, we'll actually switch it to X plus Y just so you don't get confused here, because I'm just giving you an example. It has nothing to do with this problem, except for the fact that it's relatable. If we were to do X plus Y squared, we know that we would get X squared plus 2 XY plus Y squared. So that's a good pattern to memorize, right? Because if you know this, then you don't have to actually do this middle step where you're adding these two, because you'll just know that it'll be 2 times our X and our Y, or in this case, 2 times our A and our B over 2. So if you can memorize that, that'll be helpful. And you would see that 2 times our AB over 2 would get rid of our 2, and we'd be left with plus AB, which we see here as we go A squared plus AB over 2 plus AB over 2. That's the same as plus 2AB over 2. The 2's would cancel, and we'd get A squared plus AB, and then we have plus B squared over 4 as our answer. So plus B squared over 4. Now we find which equation is the same as ours, and that is D. So D is our answer. Marissa needs to hire at least 10 staff members for an upcoming project. The staff members will be made of junior directors who will be paid $640 per week and senior directors who will be paid $880 per week. Her budget for paying staff members is no more than $9,700 per week. She must hire at least at least 3 junior directors and at least 1 senior director. Which of the following systems of inequalities represents the conditions described? If X is the number of junior directors and Y is the number of senior directors. All right, well, she can't spend more than $9,700, right? So we can get rid of anything with this here greater than that, so that'll get rid of A. B is good, C is not good, and D is good. Now I also know that X plus Y, our total number of staff members, has to be at least 10, so X plus Y has to be greater than 10. I see that I have that in answer choice B, but not in D, so my answer is going to be B. Alright, question 10. In the equation above, a, b, c, and d are constants. If the equation has roots -1, -3, and 5, which of the following is a factor of the equation that we're given, right? Well, if our root is -1, then we would have x plus 1 as a factor. So our answer is going to be B. All right, question 11. The expression given here, where x is greater than 1 and y is greater than 1, is equivalent to which of the following? All right, what I'm going to do since I have a division here is I'm going to have x to the -2 minus x to the 1/3, or minus, right, x to the -2, and then I have minus 1/3 up here. Because I subtract what's in my denominator, that's going to give me x to the -7/3, and then I have y to the half minus -1, which becomes plus 1, which will give me y to the power of 3/2. All right, well, y to the power of 3/2 is going to be y root y, so I can get rid of a, and then on the bottom, I'm going to have that over x to the power of 7/3, since x to the -7/3 is x to the power of 7/3 on the bottom. X to the power of 7/3 is going to give me x squared times third root of x. So my answer there is going to be D. All right, question 12. The function f is defined by f of x is equal to x plus 3 times x plus 1. The graph of f in the xy plane is parabola. Which of the following intervals contains the x-coordinate of the vertex of the graph f? All right, our vertex is going to be in between our zeros. Our zeros are x equals -3 and x equals -1. So our vertex then is going to be -2. Right, I'll just put that as v. It's going to be x equals -2. So we have answer choice B, because that is the only one that contains the point -2. All right, moving on. Question 13, which of the following expressions is equivalent to the one shown? All right, we have to divide here, so we're going to have our x minus 3 out here, going into our x squared minus 2x minus 5. I see I have to multiply by x to get x squared, so I have minus x squared, and then I have minus 3x right here. Right, I have negative, my x squareds will cancel, and then I have negative 3x, which gives me plus 3x. -2 plus 3x leaves me with x, which means I have to do x plus 1. Now I get minus my x, and then I have plus 3, right, which is really, I drop this -5 down then. So now I have -5 minus 3, or I'm sorry, -5, this is going to be minus 3 right here, right? Minus 3, because it's -3 times 1. So now I have -5 plus 3, which leaves me with my remainder of 2 as my remainder. So I have x plus 1 minus 2 over x plus 3, or 2 over x minus 3. Question 14. A shipping service restricts the dimensions of the boxes it will ship for a certain type of service. The restriction states that for boxes shaped like rectangular prisms, the sum of the perimeter, which is 2L plus 2W, of the base of the box and the height cannot exceed 130 inches. The perimeter, right, has to be less than 130. The perimeter of the base is determined using the width and length of the box. If the box has a height of 60, its length is 2 times its width, so L equals 2.5 W. Which inequality shows the allowable width x in inches of the box? So we're going to go ahead and plug in 2.5 W for L. So now I get 2 times 2.5 W. That's going to give me 5W plus 2W. And then this H it said was 60, so I subtract 60 from 130 and I get 70. So now I get 7W must be less than 70. I divide each side by W, and I divide each side by 7, and I get W has to be less than 10, but greater than 0. So I get A. All right, question 15. The expression 1/3 x squared minus 2 can be rewritten as 1/3 x minus k times x plus k, where k is a positive constant. What's the value of k? All right, well, I know negative k squared times 1/3 has to equal -2. I multiply each side by 3 to get rid of this, and I get -6 equals negative k squared. Therefore, k squared has to equal 6, and k has to equal the root of 6. So my answer is D. 9. In the xy plane, the graph of the equation above is a circle. Point P is on the circle and has coordinates 10 and -5. If PQ is the diameter of the circle with the coordinates point P, well, I see my r squared value is 16. I square root that to get r, and I get 4 equals my radius, which means my diameter then is going to equal 8. With a diameter of 8, I'm looking for a point that is 8 units right away from my point P here. So when I see that right off the bat, I see I have -5 here and -5 here and 2 here. I see those points are 8 points away, so that's probably going to be my answer, but I just want to check and make sure there's no others, because it could also be that that point's here and this one's here, right? So I look at this one here, I see I have a difference of 4. 4 squared is going to give me 16, and I also have a difference of 4. This is all from my original point, which is also going to give me 16. That's going to give me 32, but I need 64, right? Because my diameter squared is 64. So that's out, and then 6, that's the same thing, right? It's going to be 16, and then -5, that's nothing, it doesn't move, so that's a 0. So that one's also out. Here's 6 again, that's also going to be 16, and -9 is 4 away as well. So 16 plus 16 gives me 32, but I need it to be 64 as in A. So A is my answer. Question 10. A group of 202 people went on an overnight camping trip, taking 60 tents with them. Some of the tents held 2 people each, and the rest held 4 people each. Assuming all the tents were filled to capacity and every person got to sleep in a tent, exactly how many were 2-person tents? All right, 2-person tents is going to be T, 4-person is going to be F. T plus F equals 60. I know 202 is my total, and I know I have 2T plus 4F for my number of people I can sleep in each. I can go ahead and solve for T by saying F is equal to 60 minus T. Now I plug that in, I get 4 times 60, that's going to be 240. I subtract it from each side, and I'll get negative 38 over here. I also have minus 4t. 2t minus 4t is going to give me negative 2t. I divide each side by negative 2, and I will get that t is equal to 19. So my answer is going to be C. All right, question 11. Which of the following could be the equation of the graph above? I see both endpoints are going up, so I know I can't have an x cubed. It has to be an even x to an even power. So I can go ahead and get rid of a and c, and then I just look for my roots. I see x plus 3, so I have to have a 0 at negative 3 then, which I do here. I see x negative x minus 2. I have to have a 0 then at 2, and I do. My answer is going to be B, because that's going to be x to the 4th as well, so it goes up. All right, question 12. And I see my roots here aren't what they need to be, so I can get rid of D. All right, question 12. If 2a over b is 1/2, what's b over a? All right, well, I can just go ahead and say then that a is 0.5. To get that to equal 1, I can say that b is equal to 2. All right, so now I go ahead, I have 2 as b, and then I have 0.5 as a. 2 over 0.5 is 4. My answer is D. Question 13. Oil and gas production in a certain area dropped from 4 million barrels to 2.9 million barrels in 2013. Assuming that the oil and gas production decreased at a constant rate, which of the following linear functions F best models the production in millions of barrels T after the year 2000? All right, we start at 4 in all of them, right? Everyone has that, but we're not increasing as time goes on. We're decreasing, and we're decreasing over a period of 13 years, right? So 130, and we're decreasing by 4 minus 1.9, which is 2.1. So we're going to have that negative 21 over 130. So our answer is C. All right, question 14. How many solutions are there to the equation above? All right, well, what I see here is I have y equals x squared plus 3x minus 7. Now what I can go ahead and do is I can plug that in for y down here, and I'm going to get x squared plus 3x and minus 5x will give me minus 2x. And then I have minus 7 and plus 8 will give me plus 1 equals 0. I can factor that out, and I can say that that's going to be x minus 1 squared, which means that there's only going to be one solution, right? And I plug in 1 for my answer then, and I plug in 1, and I get 1 squared is 1 plus 3, that's going to be 4. 4 minus 7 gives me negative 3y. Negative 3 minus 5 is going to give me negative 8 plus 8, that equals 0. Answer C. Question 15, the functions g and h are defined above. What is the value of h of 0? H of 0 means I plug in 0 here, I plug in 0 here, and I plug in 0 here then. So that's going to give me negative 1 as g of 0. So I have 1 minus negative 1, the same as 1 plus 1. My answer is going to be D is 2. All right. A system of 3 equations is graphed in the xy plane. How many solutions does the system have? Well, the solution is going to be where all 3 points intersect. That only occurs right there where that circle is. That's one time. My answer is going to be B. Question 10. The equation above is true for all x where a and b are constants. What's the value of a times b? All right, all I'm worried about is x squared, because that's what a times b is, right? It's negative ab x squared. I see I have 3 times 5x squared, which gives me plus 15x squared. That has to equal my x squared value on the other side, which is negative 9x squared. So now I'm going to go ahead and subtract my 15x squared from each side. 9 minus that 15x squared gives me negative 24. My x squareds cancel, so I'll just be left with negative ab equals negative 24. My negatives will cancel, and I have ab equals 24. So my answer is C. Question 11, which of the following represents all the possible values of x to satisfy the given equation? I'm going to multiply each side by x minus 3 to get rid of that, and then I'm going to multiply each side by 2 to get rid of this, and then I'm going to set it all equal to 0. So I have 2x times x, that's going to be 2x squared, and then I got that 2x times that negative 3, it's going to give me minus 6x, minus 2x from the other side, set it equal to 0. It's going to be 2x squared minus 8x. I can factor out my 2x and set that equal to 0, and then my other factor there then will be x minus 4. I set that equal to 0. That tells me that x can equal 0, and x will also equal 4, right? So now I can go ahead and put those in as my answer choices. I can quick check 0, 0 in the numerator, 0 in the numerator here. I'm going to get 0, and then I plug 4 in. 4 over 4 minus 3, that's 4 over 1. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 over 2 is also 4. So that is going to be my answer, and I checked it there. All right, question 12. Which of the following is equivalent to the expression above for x is greater than 0? All right, my lowest common denominator is going to be 2x plus 1. When I multiply 2x plus 1 by this here, I see that this cancels. I'm left with 1 over it, and then I can do 5 times that 2x plus 1 over 2x plus 1. 5 times 2x gives me 10x. 5 times 1 gives me plus 5. And then I also have that plus 1 from that other side. So I'm going to have 10x plus 6 over my denominator of 2x plus 1. Question 13. All right, which of the following function, what defines the function f, right, that's shown above? All right, well, I'm going to have my plus 1 here, right, because that's going to be my minimum value. I have that in all of them. I see if I go 1 to the right or 1 to the left, I'm going up by 4, and I know I only have an x squared because there's nothing in front of it, right? So I know I have to have that value be 4 right here. Then I also see if this plus 1 wasn't here, my x-intercept then would be at 3, which means I have to have x minus 3 here. So I know my answer is going to be A. All right, question 14. In which of the following does the shaded region represent the solution set in the xy plane of the system of inequalities above? I have y is greater than or equal to x plus 2. I got my equation x plus 2. That's this line right here. It has to be greater than. It has to be on this side, so I can get rid of A and I can get rid of D because they don't have that. Now my next equation, I'm going to put it in standard form, which is going to be 3y is less than or equal to 2x plus 6. I divide each side by 3. I have 2/3 x plus 2, right? And y has to be less than that, which means it has to be below that line, right? So that line is this line, and x has to be below it. I see that this is my solution right here, right? It's going to be B, this shaded region there, because it's above this line here, but it's below this line here. So my answer there is B. Now I can move on. What is the set of all the solutions to the equation here? I square each side, right? Negative x squared is going to give me x squared, and that's going to equal x plus 2. I'm going to set that equal to 0 by subtracting x and 2 from each side. I'm going to get x squared minus x minus 2 equals 0. I factor that out, and I get x minus 2 times x plus 1, which tells me that x can equal 2 and x can equal negative 1, but I have to check that answer. So I plug in 2. I get 2 plus 2 underneath that square root. Root 4 gives me 2. Does 2 equal negative 2? It does not, so 2 cannot be an answer. I can get rid of that. So now I can go ahead and plug in that negative 1. Negative 1 plus 2 gives me square root of 1. Square root of 1 is 1. And then negative 1 times negative 1 gives me 1. So my answer choice will be B, because that's 1 equals 1. All right, moving on. Question 9. Which of the following is an equation of line L in the xy plane above? All right, well, I see that my y-intercept's negative 4, so I can go ahead and get rid of B and D. Now my slope I see is negative 1 because I go down 1 and over 1. So my slope, when I'm in standard form like this, it's going to be negative A over B, where A is x and B is y. So my slope I know is negative 1, so I have to have that negative x over y. So I look for an equation that has x plus y, because then I'm going to have that negative x over y. Y is going to be positive, so that right there will give me my answer as C. All right, question 10. The graph of y equals 2x squared plus 10x plus 12 is shown. If the graph crosses the y-axis at point 0k, what is the value of k? Well, if I'm plugging in 0 for x, this is going to be 0, and so is this going to be 0. So I see y will equal 12, which means that k will equal 12. So my answer is D. Question 11. A circle in the xy plane has center 5, 7, and radius 2. Which of the following is an equation of the circle? All right, radius 2, I know that I'm going to equal my radius squared, so I need 2 squared. That's going to equal 4, so I can get rid of C and D. All right, I also know that I'm going to have my x minus my h squared, where h is 5, that x point in my center. So I need to have x minus 5 squared, so my answer is going to be A. All right, question 12. In the triangle, in the figure above, triangle ABC is similar to DEF. What's the value of cosine E? All right, well, I know that cosine E is going to equal my cosine B, since they're similar triangles. I know that cosine is adjacent over the hypotenuse. I see my adjacent is 12 and my hypotenuse is 13, so my answer is going to be 12 over 13, which is answer choice B. All right, question 13. In the xy plane, the graph of the function f of x is equal to x squared plus 5x plus 4 has 2 x-intercepts. What is the distance between the x-intercepts? Well, if I factor this out, I see I'm going to have x plus 4 times x plus 1, which gives me my intercepts as x equals negative 4 and x equals negative 1. The distance between those is 3, so my answer is going to be C. Question 14. What are all values of x that satisfy the given equation? I only have 2 here, so I'm going to plug them in because that's going to be faster than finding them. So I'm going to go ahead and use 1. So I have 4 times 1 and square rooted. That's going to be square root 4, which is 2. Now, does 2 equal 1 minus 3? It does not, because 1 minus 3 is negative 2. Those don't equal. Therefore, 1 is not a solution. I can get rid of anything with 1. Now I plug in 2. It has 9. 9 times 4 is 36. The square root of 36 is 6. And does that equal 9 minus 3? Yes, it does. 6 equals 6. So my answer is going to be 2 only, which is choice B. Question 15. In the system of equations above, A is a constant. For which of the following values of A does the system have no solutions? All right, well, we're going to have no solutions where our slopes are equivalent, right? So I know that my slope in standard form is negative a over b. If I plug in my a value, my a is negative 3, so negative 3 gives me positive 3 over my b value, which is y. And that has to equal my a, right? My negative a, because that's my slope, negative a over b. So that has to equal my negative a over 2y. I multiply each side by 2y to isolate my negative a. All right, so I do that. I see my y's are going to cancel here, and I'll be left with 6 equals negative a. Therefore, a will have to equal negative 6. So my answer is going to be a. All right, question.